Imagine for a second that you are just standing in absolute pitch darkness. You're deep underground, like 60 feet below the surface of a Mediterranean
Right.
island.
It's completely black.
Exactly. The air is cold, it's heavy, and it smells of this really ancient, damp limestone. You are standing in a vast subterranean labyrinth that was meticulously carved out of solid rock over 6,000 years ago.
Which is just a staggering amount of time when you really think about it.
It really is. And now imagine a man stands in front of a specific curved section of the cave wall, a wall painted with these strange red discs, and he speaks. He doesn't yell, he just speaks in a deep, resonant voice.
And the sound doesn't just echo.
It explodes, yes.
Say.
It reverberates with this bone-shaking, strident intensity. It amplifies to the decibel level of like a modern rock concert, just vibrating through your chest cavity and rattling your teeth.
Yeah.
So the question is, how did a supposedly primitive Stone Age civilization engineer a perfectly tuned stereophonic acoustic amplifier without wires, without electricity, and, without computers?
It is, it's a phenomenal question. And I mean, the conventional answer you'll find in Orthodox textbooks is just utterly insufficient.
Yeah, they usually just brush it off.
Right. Conformist historians will tell you it's just a quirk of cave acoustics, like an accidental byproduct of people digging tombs.
Yeah.
But when you look at the sheer calculated mathematics of the architecture,
The math doesn't lie.
exactly, the accident theory completely falls apart.
It really does. And honestly, that tearing apart of the conventional narrative is exactly what we are doing today. Welcome, everyone, to a brand new deep dive right here on the English BookCast.
Thrilled to be here for this one.
We are taking a massive, just uncompromising look at a piece of source material that is going to completely, upend the way you look at the world around you. We're analyzing a Livro de Passado Misterioso, which translates to the Book of the Mysterious Past, written by the brilliant and highly provocative Robert Charroux.
Yeah, Charroux's work is really a masterclass in challenging the status quo.
Yeah.
I mean, his core premise is both elegant and deeply disruptive.
Disruptive is definitely the word for it.
He argues that human history is vastly more complex, infinitely more bizarre, and far older than the sanitized, perfectly packaged timelines that get handed down to us by mainstream academia.
Right, the stuff we all learn in middle school?
Exactly. He
Yeah.
suggests that Orthodox science has built this neat, comfortable little box for human history. And anything that doesn't fit into that box,
Aswell's a cave.
right, any physical anomaly, any inexplicable ancient ruin, or any bizarre historical account that defies the laws of physics, it all just gets quietly, systematically swept under the rug.
Well, today our mission is to basically rip up that rug and examine every single piece of dirt hidden underneath.
I love that.
We're focusing extensively on two major sections of Charroux's work today. First, we're looking at his chapters on prehistory, so specifically chapters 1 through 5.
Which is where the hard evidence is.
Yes, exactly. This is where we examine the hard physical evidence scattered across our planet that simply should not exist according to conventional timelines. Then we're going to pivot into what he terms the mysterious unknown.
That's chapters 6 through 11.
Right. And this is where we move from ancient architecture into recorded history. We'll be looking at documented events, magical pacts, and physical phenomena that completely shatter our understanding of biology, physics, and honestly, reality itself.
It gets wild.
It really gets wild. So let's start with the physical anomalies, the things you can actually go out and touch, but which defy all logical explanation. Charroux kicks off chapter 1 by introducing us to the idea of the unusual terrestrial.
Yeah, and he begins here quite intentionally because before he asks the reader to accept these grand theories of human origin or the occult, he points to giant, undeniable physical objects.
Objects that just serve no logical purpose.
Right. He wants to demonstrate that our ancestors were doing things that modern utility simply cannot explain. And the prime example he utilizes is located in Ceylon, which we know today as the island nation of Sri Lanka.
Okay. Yeah.
Specifically, he draws our attention to the sheer cliffs of Sigiriya.
Oh man, the stairs of Sigiriya. I really want you at home to picture this because when I was reviewing the source material, I had to look up the topography of this place to fully grasp the absurdity of it.
It's hard to visualize without seeing it.
It is. You have this massive monolithic rock formation rising hundreds of meters straight up out of the jungle. It is a sheer vertical cliff face, and carved directly into the side of this impossible precipice are what appear to be stairs.
But they aren't stairs that any human being could ever actually use.
Not at all. They're these precisely carved geometric square holes.
Right. Each one measures exactly 15 by 15 centimeters.
Which is tight.
It is. And they are arranged in a staggering, perfectly aligned chessboard pattern, just marching directly up the sheer 90-degree face of the mountain. And, the most baffling part.
They lead nowhere.
Exactly. They send the sheer cliff and then simply terminate in thin air.
I mean, I'm trying to wrap my head around the logistics of this from a conventional standpoint. We are supposed to believe that an ancient civilization dragged laborers to the base of a vertical cliff, erected some kind of massive, highly unstable prehistoric scaffolding.
Which would be an engineering marvel in itself.
Right. And then spent months, maybe years, chiseling perfect right angles into solid granite. For what? To create a path that no human foot could comfortably step on.
With no handholds either.
Yeah, it offers no handholds and ultimately leads to an empty drop to your death. It makes zero sense.
From a purely rational utilitarian perspective, it is profoundly absurd.
Huh.
Orthodox archaeology attempts to categorize them as foundational supports for a wooden structure that has long since rotted away.
Oh, come on.
Yeah, but the pattern and placement completely defy structural engineering logic. Charroux, however, offers a completely different lens. He suggests that our fatal flaw is looking at these structures through the rigid, pragmatic framework of modern utility.
You know what it reminds me of? It feels like when you are playing a massive open-world video game
Yeah.
and you stumble into an area where the developers left a glitch in the map.
Well, that's a good way to put it.
Right. You walk up to a solid brick wall and there's a fully rendered door hovering 20 feet in the air, or a staircase that just clips straight through the geometry of the skybox.
Yeah, exactly.
Those paths aren't meant for you, the player character. They're meant for the game's code, or for non-player entities, or they're just structural anomalies of the world's programming. Charroux is essentially arguing that these physical stairs in Sri Lanka are glitches in our terrestrial map.
That is an incredibly apt analogy. I mean, they are architectural anomalies that point to a totally different set of physical rules.
So who are they for, then?
Well, Charroux explicitly suggests these are paths meant for non-human entities. Perhaps what ancient people called gods or spirits or beings traversing from a different dimension altogether.
Wow.
Yeah. And he connects this physical anomaly in Sri Lanka to broader conceptual anomalies found in global mythology. He specifically focuses on Celtic mythology here.
Wait, how so? What do the Celts have to do with a rock face in Sri Lanka?
It's about the shared conceptual understanding of how reality operates. In Chapter 2, Charroux discusses how Celtic legends speak frequently of dangerous castles or enchanted fortresses.
Okay.
In these stories, solid stone walls would miraculously open up. But they didn't open into, an adjacent courtyard. They opened to allow heroes to pass directly into alternate dimensions.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, these were realms where the fundamental laws of time, space, and aging operated entirely differently than they do in our everyday terrestrial reality.
So, Charroux is saying that the stairs in Sigiriya might not be physical stairs meant for physical feet, but rather literal geographic focal points for dimensional travel. They're essentially dormant portals.
Yes, and he doesn't confine this idea to just Sri Lanka or Celtic Europe. He tracks this global pattern to South America as well.
Oh, right, specifically to Peru.
Exactly. He highlights the Yellow Rock, which is situated south of Arequipa. According to the texts Charroux references, this rock bears an ancient inscription that doesn't just tell a story, it acts as a literal magical key.
A key to what?
It describes a secret entrance, a specific tunnel known as Sokoban.
The Sokoban Tunnel. And the lore surrounding this tunnel is wild. It doesn't just lead down into a standard limestone cave system, right?
No, not at all. The legend states it leads to a lost, ancient world, a subterranean realm of profound mystery and immense hidden wealth.
But you can't just walk in. The entrance, which is supposedly hidden behind one of the 3 volcanic peaks in the area, is fiercely protected. It's guarded by what the legends call deadly emanations.
Right, deadly emanations.
And whether that means highly toxic volcanic gases or something far more esoteric and dimensional is really up for debate.
Yeah, it acts as a biological and spiritual barrier. But let's pause and consider the implications of what you just asked a moment ago.
Okay.
How did ancient people across completely disconnected continents, from Sri Lanka to Ireland to Peru, even conceptualize the idea of parallel dimensions, portals, and subterranean worlds if it's all just primitive fiction?
Right. Because if you are a primitive farmer whose entire existence revolves around planting seasons and avoiding predators, you don't spontaneously invent the concept of quantum dimensional phasing just to pass the time around the campfire.
Exactly. This is the crux of Charroux' argument in this early section. He postulates that there was a fundamental psychological and cognitive difference between our ancient ancestors and us.
A cognitive difference.
Yes, he argues that ancient humans possessed what he terms a psychology of the marvelous.
The psychology of the marvelous. Break that down for me. What does that actually mean?
It means their minds were physically and culturally oriented in a different way. They didn't perceive a hard, impenetrable barrier between the physical, rational world and the supernatural parallel universes.
Good.
They interacted with these concepts fluidly as a matter of empirical reality. Modern rationalism, in its relentless quest to categorize, quantify, and commodify everything, has essentially amputated this psychological capacity.
So we've lost it.
Completely. We have unlearned the ability to perceive or interact with the marvelous, which leaves us utterly baffled when we stare at the relics of a civilization that could.
Man, we've basically uninstalled the software required to read the code of our own planet.
That's exactly it.
We're looking at a 3D image without the glasses, so it just looks like a blurry mess, and we call it primitive art. And this blindness doesn't just apply to things on top of mountains either.
No, not at all.
Charroux points out that we are equally blind to things sitting right off our coastlines. He brings up Bimini.
Yes, Bimini. The waters off the coast of Bimini, which is located about 80 kilometers east of Miami, are famous for their shallow depth and incredibly clear visibility.
Right.
And in 1971, an explorer and researcher named Dr. Manson Valentin made a discovery there that sent absolute shockwaves through the unorthodox historical community. He found what appeared to be cyclopean underwater walls.
Cyclopean meaning massive polygonal stones fitted together without mortar, right? Like the stuff you see in Peru.
Correct. Immense, perfectly fitted stones stretching across the ocean floor. And not just walls, but along with what appeared to be the foundational base of a pyramid.
And of course, if you ask a conventional marine geologist about the Bimini Road, they will confidently tell you, oh, that's just a natural geological phenomenon called beach rock fracturing.
Oh, naturally?
Yeah, they say the limestone just naturally cracked into perfectly straight rectangular blocks that look exactly like a road, but Charroux entirely rejects that as a desperate cover-up, right?
He does. He finds the naturalistic explanation highly improbable, given the geometric precision of the blocks. Instead, Charroux links these submerged cyclopean ruins directly to the legends that drove the early European explorers.
Which ones?
Well, he points out a fascinating geographical coincidence. This is the exact same area where Ponce de Leon, the Spanish conquistador, was desperately searching for the Fountain of Youth.
Whoa, that is a massive connection. Because we are taught that Ponce de Leon was basically just a superstitious fool looking for a magic puddle in the swamps of Florida.
Right, a complete myth.
But Charroux is saying, no, he was acting on very real, though perhaps degraded intelligence. He connects the Bimini structures to the remnants of Atlantis, or perhaps Antilia, the legendary Phantom Island of the Atlantic.
Charroux weaves a highly compelling narrative tapestry here. The logic is that legends of a fountain of youth, waters that possess the power to rejuvenate human biology, might actually be a distorted cultural memory.
A memory of what?
A memory of the highly advanced biological, chemical, or spiritual knowledge possessed by the inhabitants of this submerged world before it was destroyed. The marvelous wasn't just abstract magic, it was a highly advanced understanding of physical reality that literally sank beneath the waves.
And the barrier between our terrestrial world and whatever world those builders came from isn't perfectly sealed. Charroux argues that occasionally that barrier leaks.
It does leak.
Which brings us to one of the most bizarre and frankly unsettling parts of this section. If there are parallel worlds or subterranean worlds, do things ever fall out of them and end up here?
Charroux says yes.
Yeah, he brings up the historical accounts of the Green Children.
This is a classic documented anomaly that conformist history just completely ignores. Charroux details accounts of two green children who appeared out of nowhere in Spain near Catalonia in August of 1887.
Let's paint the picture of this incident for the listener because the details are what make it so compelling. Agricultural workers are out in the fields and suddenly two children emerge from a nearby cave system. But they aren't just lost locals. Their skin is tinted a distinct biological shade of green.
Literal green skin.
Yes. They are wearing clothing made of a material that no one in the region recognizes. And when they try to communicate, they speak a language that is utterly alien. Local linguists and scholars were brought in, and no one could identify a single root word or syntax structure.
They're completely baffled.
They were exhausted, terrified, and seemed fundamentally alien to the solar radiation and atmosphere of our surface environment.
Exactly. The boy soon died, unable to adapt, while the girl survived for a few years. Her skin slowly lost its green hue as she assimilated, though she never fully explained where they came from.
Did she say anything at all?
She only mentioned a land without a sun. And Charroux parallels this 1887 Spanish account with a much later, equally baffling event in California in 1911.
Oh, the slaughterhouse incident.
Precisely. In the middle of the night, a man appeared out of absolutely nowhere at a slaughterhouse in California.
Out of thin air.
Yes. He was completely nude, near death from extreme exhaustion, and like the children in Spain, he spoke a dialect that did not match any known indigenous or cataloged language in the entirety of the Americas.
Which is insane for 1911.
Right. Anthropologists from major universities studied him and were completely baffled. He possessed no cultural touchstones connecting him to any known human group.
So what is Charroux's conclusion here? Because he's heavily implying that these aren't just feral children or isolated tribesmen who got lost in the woods.
No, he argues they are biological proof that the rigid boundaries of our world are much more porous than we admit. He suggests they are evidence of those paths to nowhere, like the stairs in Sri Lanka or the Sokoban Tunnel actually functioning.
So they came to the portals.
Exactly. They're individuals who somehow accidentally crossed over from a parallel dimension or perhaps emerged from a vast, isolated subterranean civilization.
It's like they clipped through the floor of their reality and landed in ours.
That's a perfect way to describe it. If you accept the premise of the psychology of the marvelous, then a green child emerging from a cave or a man appearing from nowhere speaking an unknown tongue isn't an unsolvable anthropological puzzle. It is simply a localized failure of the dimensional barrier.
Man, but I know what everyone listening is thinking right now. It is the massive, undeniable question that hangs over all of this.
The big who.
Exactly. If humanity didn't build the Cyclopean walls of Bimini, if we didn't engineer the stairs of Sigiriya, and if there are advanced parallel or subterranean civilizations leaking into our world, where did they come from? Who built the infrastructure of the marvelous?
Right.
And that leads us directly into Chapter 3, the concept of the superior ancestors and the extraterrestrial origins of humanity.
This is where Charroux truly swings for the fences, taking his localized anomalies and building a grand unifying theory of human history. He looks at the timeline of human development proposed by orthodox anthropology, and he essentially says the math does not work.
Not even a little bit.
He points to the sudden leaps in ancient knowledge and architecture and argues that there was a massive reset button pressed on our history.
The Great Flood.
Yes, the deluge. This is a nearly universal mythological motif. You find it in the Epic of Gilgamesh, in the Bible, in Hindu texts, and Mesoamerican lore.
It's everywhere.
It is. And Charroux doesn't view this as a metaphor. He views it as a literal, global cataclysm. And whether it was caused by water, an asteroid strike causing global fire, or even a weaponized global epidemic, Charroux argues that this massive event winced out almost the entirety of antediluvian history.
Antediluvian meaning the history before the flood.
Exactly.
So civilization was essentially wiped from the hard drive. The only things that survived were a fraction of the population, a traumatized, primitive remnant that had completely forgotten the essential advanced truths of their own past. They retained the myths, but lost the science.
Precisely. The flood hit the reset button. But Charroux asks the deeper question. Who set up the game in the first place? If antediluvian society was highly advanced, where did that advancement come from?
And his answer is wild.
He argues that our true ancestors, the beings who seeded high civilization on Earth, were not native to this planet.
He calls them the superior ancestors, or the first fathers. And he does not mince words here. He is explicitly stating that they were extraterrestrials.
Yes, from the cosmos.
They navigated the void of space and set up an initiation center right here on Earth to condition, educate, and genetically manipulate the early terrestrial hominid prototypes.
It is a radical, uncompromising departure from the standard anthropological model. Charroux is positing that Earth was not the organic cradle of intelligent evolution, but rather a colonial outpost, a cosmic laboratory.
And he brings in mythology to back this up, right?
Yes, to support this, he leans heavily into the ancient mythologies of Hyperborea and Thule.
Okay, let's unpack Hyperborea, because this pops up a lot in esoteric history. In ancient Greek tradition, Hyperborea was said to be a perfect, utopian land far to the north, beyond the cold winds, inhabited by a race of giants or godlike beings who lived incredibly long lives. Most historians say the Greeks just made it up to represent an unreachable ideal.
But Charroux takes the texts literally. He actually attempts to place this capital, Thule, on a map. He theorizes that it was located somewhere between Ireland and Greenland.
Which immediately sounds insane to a modern listener. I mean, if you are an advanced extraterrestrial race looking to set up a colony, why would you choose a frozen, inhospitable glacier in the North Atlantic?
Because of paleoclimatology. Charroux points out that planetary climates are not static. In a previous climatic cycle, before the current glaciation period locked that region in ice, the area between Ireland and Greenland was temperate.
So it wasn't always frozen.
Exactly. It was a lush land of green fields where stable crops like wheat could easily grow. It offered a perfect resource-rich environment. But more importantly, it offered isolation.
Right. Why is isolation so important for a space-sharing race?
Quarantine. Charroux provides a highly pragmatic biological rationale for this location. If these first fathers arrived from a fundamentally different planetary environment, their immune systems would be entirely unequipped for terrestrial biology.
They get sick instantly.
Or worse, they would need to avoid immediate, catastrophic biological contamination. They couldn't just land in the middle of a teeming primordial jungle in Africa or South America. They would seek out isolated islands or remote northern continents to slowly acclimatize themselves.
That makes sense.
They needed a sterile staging ground to safely interact with the terrestrial environment without exposing themselves to unknown, lethal terrestrial pathogens, or conversely, wiping out all terrestrial life with a cosmic virus they carried.
That makes a bizarre, deeply logical kind of sense. It's exactly what NASA does. When the Apollo astronauts came back from the moon, we didn't just let them walk into a crowd. We locked them in an Airstream quarantine trailer for weeks, just in case they brought back space microbes.
Exactly. The protocol is the same.
Charroux is saying Earth was the quarantine trailer. But where did they come from before the trailer?
Charroux engages in some fascinating theoretical extrapolation regarding their planetary origins. Based on their choice to settle in the far north of Earth, he suggests they likely originated from a much colder zone of the cosmos.
Like where?
He speculates about the asteroid belt near Mars, suggesting it might be the shattered remains of a once inhabitable, colder world. Or, conversely, he suggests they might have originated from Venus, fleeing that planet before its runaway greenhouse effect rendered it a hellscape.
Wow.
If they came from a cooler environment, the temperate, isolated northern latitudes of Hyperborea would have been the most biologically comfortable climate for them to establish their initiation centers.
I want to stop for a second and just absorb the sheer scale of what Charroux is proposing here, because if he is right, it completely annihilates Charles Darwin.
Oh, it completely throws Darwin out the window. Charroux is highly critical of the Darwinian evolutionary model. He points specifically to the enduring problem of the missing link, the glaring lack of transitional fossil evidence, showing a smooth, uninterrupted biological transition from ape-like ancestors to the sudden, explosive brain capacity of modern Homo sapiens.
So he thinks the link isn't missing,
It simply doesn't exist, because the transition wasn't organic. It was an artificial, extraterrestrial intervention.
I have to play the skeptic here because this is a massive pill to swallow. But I am genuinely intrigued by the philosophical implications. I know you at home are probably raising your eyebrows. But imagine looking at Earth not as this miraculous organic cradle where life slowly crawled out of the primordial mud over billions of years and eventually invented the wheel.
Imagine a completely different paradigm.
Instead, imagine Earth as a cosmic transfer school and climatization center. We weren't born here in our current form. We were imported, or at least heavily upgraded by those who were. We were conditioned. It completely flips the script on what it means to be a human being.
The philosophical weight of that paradigm shift is immense. If Charroux's thesis holds, if we are the distant hybridized descendants of imported extraterrestrial initiators, even if that noble lineage has been severely degraded over millennia by planetary cataclysms and interbreeding with terrestrial primates, then our ultimate destiny is fundamentally cosmic, not terrestrial.
We're not from here.
We are not just highly evolved apes clinging to a rock. We are displaced cosmic citizens.
Which means our entire modern obsession with space travel, our desperation to build rockets and walk on Mars, wouldn't just be driven by scientific curiosity. It would be a latent biological homing instinct.
a homing instinct to return to the stars from which our first fathers descended. It's a profound thought, but it raises the immediate historical question. If we have these extraterrestrial superior ancestors hanging out in Hyperborea running their planetary initiation centers, they clearly aren't here now.
No, they definitely aren't.
We don't see them walking the streets. So
Yeah.
where did they go?
Right. They didn't just pack up their spaceships and leave no trace. Charroux says they went in the exact opposite direction. They went down.
Yes.
And that brings us to the incredible theories laid out in chapters 4 and 5, subterranean kingdoms and the evidence of impossible chemistry.
Having established that our ancestors were highly advanced and of cosmic origin, Charroux sets out to trace their disappearance. When the climate shifted or when the Great Flood threatened the surface, they sought refuge. He investigates the persistent, global legends of lost subterranean civilizations.
Specifically Lemuria and Agartha, right?
Yes, focusing heavily on Lemuria and Agartha. And crucially, he does not view these as mere fairy tales or psychological archetypes. He views them as the literal physical refuge of the survivors of the antediluvian world.
And he pulls in some heavy-hitting documented historical mysteries to back this up. He doesn't just rely on ancient scrolls. He brings up the incredibly famous disappearance of Colonel Percy Fawcett in the 20th century.
Right. Colonel Fawcett was a highly respected, deeply experienced British surveyor and explorer. In 1925, he vanished without a trace in the uncharted Mato Grosso region of the Brazilian Amazon. While searching for a highly advanced lost city he simply called Z.
And what does standard history say happened?
The conventional historical assumption is that he and his expedition were killed by hostile indigenous tribes or succumbed to malaria or starvation.
But Charroux looks at the research of groups like the Brazilian Theosophical Society. They proposed a much wilder, but in Charroux's view, more accurate theory. They argued that Fawcett wasn't killed.
No, they believe he succeeded.
Yeah. They believed that Fawcett and his son actually found exactly what they were looking for. But it wasn't a ruined stone city overgrown by jungle vines on the surface. They discovered an entrance to a subterranean realm and were captured by, or perhaps voluntarily absorbed into, a highly advanced Lemurian civilization operating deep beneath the Amazon basin.
It completely transforms a tragic narrative of colonial exploration into an active encounter with the marvelous. It suggests that the antediluvian world didn't die. It merely relocated.
Wow.
And Charroux pairs this South American subterranean kingdom with an even more complex one in Asia, the kingdom of Agartha.
Agartha, this is a massive piece of esoteric lore.
It is. Agartha is a legendary massive subterranean kingdom said to be located beneath the sub-Himalayan region, possibly stretching under Tibet, Mongolia, or Afghanistan.
And it's not just a bunch of caves.
According to the traditions Charroux analyzes, it is not a primitive cave system, but a technologically and spiritually supreme empire ruled by a figure known as the King of the World.
And Charroux notes a fascinating, highly specific detail in these legends. The texts claim that around 6,000 years ago, a massive sociological anomaly occurred. An entire population of ancient tribes simply vanished from the surface of the earth.
They just disappeared?
They didn't die out from famine. They intentionally migrated into the crust of the planet to join this subterranean kingdom. Charroux even speculates that the famous lost tribes of Israel, who vanished from historical record, might have found their way into this vast global subterranean network.
It's a fascinating theory.
Okay, I have to stop here, because I know exactly what the listener is thinking. A whole civilization packed their bags and moved into the Earth's crust. That sounds like pure science fiction.
It does sound like sci-fi.
Digging a hole is one thing, but excavating and sustaining a subterranean empire requires massive industrialized technology. How could people 6,000 years ago possibly do that?
That is the exact logical hurdle Charroux anticipates.
Oh.
To prove that prehistoric people possessed the kind of advanced industrial-level technology needed to burrow into the Earth, he pivots back to Europe. He points to physical, tangible evidence that conformist archaeologists utterly dread.
The vitrified forts.
Yes, the vitrified forts.
This is where the physical evidence becomes undeniably, frustratingly perplexing. We are talking about sites across France, specifically in the Creuse region, sites in Scotland like Dunangus, and scattered fortresses throughout Bohemia.
Right.
These are ancient, supposedly Bronze Age or earlier stone fortresses. But when you examine the walls, the stones, which are usually solid granite, are not just stacked on top of one another, they are vitrified.
Meaning they have been subjected to such intense sustained thermal energy that the solid rock literally melted, liquefied, and fuse together into massive, solid, glass-like walls.
Let's do a deep dive into the thermodynamics of this, because this is the
Right.
part that genuinely blows my mind, and it is the absolute death knell for conventional archaeology.
It really is.
We are talking about prehistoric people dealing with granite. To melt granite, you need to achieve and sustain temperatures of between 1,300 to 1,500 degrees Celsius.
Which is insane.
To put that in perspective for everyone listening, 1,500 degrees Celsius is the heat generated by a modern industrial blast furnace used to smelt iron. It is volcanic heat. You absolutely do not get that kind of thermal output from piling up some dry wood against a wall and lighting a bonfire.
It is chemically and thermodynamically impossible.
Yeah.
A wood fire in the open air cannot reach or sustain those temperatures across massive stretches of stone walls. Charroux explores the chemistry of how this might have been achieved.
What's his theory?
He suggests that these prehistoric engineers possessed an advanced understanding of chemical accelerants. They likely utilized compounds like potash and beryllia, which, when applied to the stone, would drastically lower the melting point of the granite.
Even still.
Exactly, but even with chemical fluxes, the engineering required to generate and direct that kind of sustained localized heat across massive fortress walls is staggering.
It implies blast furnace technology, bellows, controlled airflow, and an understanding of metallurgy that we are told wasn't invented for thousands of years. It is an anomaly of the highest order. So how does mainstream academia handle this?
This is where Charroux becomes incredibly sharp in his critique. He uses the vitrified forts to expose what he views as the sheer hypocrisy and cowardice of conformist history. When a mainstream historian looks at a vitrified fort, they are forced into a corner.
Right.
They either ignore the melting entirely in their papers, or they offer laughably weak explanations. They will claim the walls melted due to accidental brush fires, or they will suggest the walls were struck by lightning.
Which is absurd. Lightning is hot, yes, but it strikes a pinpoint area for a fraction of a second. It does not systematically melt hundreds of feet of stone wall into a uniform, glassy slag.
No, of course not.
It's incredibly frustrating. It's exactly like finding a silicon microchip in an Egyptian tomb, and the lead archaeologist just shrugs and says, oh, it's probably just a very shiny, flat piece of ceremonial jewelry. They sweep this prehistoric high-tech chemistry under the rug because it fundamentally destroys their narrative.
Precisely. This is the conspiracy of conformist history that Charroux constantly rails against. Admitting that prehistoric Europeans possessed advanced chemistry and high-temperature metallurgy completely shatters the established, comfortable linear timeline of human progress.
It completely rewrites history.
It forces academia to accept that civilization does not just move upward in a straight, predictable line from cavemen to bronze tools to astronauts. It implies cyclical history. It implies that epochs of incredibly high technology can rise, completely collapse, and then fall into amnesia, or in this case, perhaps retreat underground, taking their thermal secrets with them.
They retreated underground, taking their blast furnaces and chemical accelerants with them. But they didn't just leave behind melted rocks. If we keep exploring Chapter 5, we discover that from advanced chemistry and thermodynamics, these ancient builders also mastered highly advanced physics and acoustics.
Yes.
And for this, Charroux takes us away from the cold north, down to the Mediterranean, to the island of Malta.
Malta serves as a profound focal point for Charroux's theories regarding how the marvelous wasn't just magic, but a form of applied technology. He focuses his analysis intensely on a specific site, the Halsaflini hypogeum.
Which is where we started the show.
Right. This is an immense, multi-leveled underground complex carved meticulously out of solid limestone, estimated by even conventional dating to be around 6,000 years old.
And the architecture alone is bizarre enough to warrant a deep dive. It's a massive subterranean labyrinth. But Charroux points out a fascinating architectural study showing that the overall blueprint of the hypogeum is not random.
No, it's highly intentional.
The entire complex is actually shaped to mirror the anatomy of a human body. It has specific cavern sections corresponding to a head, a bust, a main torso, and 2 legs. Why on earth would a primitive society spend generations carving a multi-level cave system to look like a giant human body?
The anthropomorphic shape is deeply symbolic, representing a return to the womb or the body of a deity. But it is the physical function of the space that is truly astonishing. Charroux does not describe the hypogeum merely as a complex tomb or religious temple.
What does he call it?
He describes it as a stereophonic central. It is, quite literally, a marvel of prehistoric acoustic engineering.
Let's explain exactly how this works because it sounds unbelievable. The builders didn't just dig holes, they carved specific, mathematically precise oval and quadrangular windows between the various chambers. These windows and curved walls act as perfect acoustic resonance chambers.
The acoustic properties of the hypogeum are legendary and heavily documented by modern audio engineers. If a person stands in a very specific designated spot, a concave wall adorned with painted red ochre discs, and speaks with a strong, deep male voice, the sound behaves in a way that defies normal cave acoustics.
It doesn't just bounce around.
No, it doesn't just bounce off the walls and echo. The architecture captures the sound waves and reverberates them with a strident physical intensity throughout the entire underground complex. It amplifies the human voice in a way that modern audio engineers struggle to replicate today without microphones, mixing boards, and massive electrical speakers.
What is the point of that? If you are a Stone Age priest, why do you need stadium-level amplification? It wasn't just for dramatic effect to scare the peasants.
No, it had a specific technological purpose.
Charroux introduces the physical artifacts found within the hypogeum to explain the true chilling purpose of this stereophonic machine. During excavations, archaeologists uncovered numerous statues of what appear to be women, but they are highly unusual.
Very unusual.
They are entirely headless, they are extremely obese, and they are completely breastless. They are referred to in the archaeological community as the Three Enormous.
Now, usually when a conventional archaeologist finds a statue of an obese female figure in a prehistoric site, the immediate lazy assumption is mother goddess or a fertility idol. They stamp it and move on.
Right.
But Charroux, leaning on the fascinating esoteric research of writer Christia's self, suggests something much darker, more scientific, and infinitely more complex. Self theorizes that these statues weren't standard mother goddesses at all, because they specifically lack breasts, the universal biological symbol of nourishment, motherhood, and fertility. She posits they represent a highly specific engineered caste of beings.
Krishna Sil's theory is wild. She suggests they were a caste of sensitives, essentially, biological mediums or living oracles, but they weren't just naturally gifted shamans. Their bodies were intentionally, physically connected.
Heavily modified.
Sylph suggests they were subjected to extreme hormonal manipulation, perhaps through deliberate castration or glandular surgery, rendering them eunuch-like, obese, and fundamentally androgynous.
This extreme physical and endocrinological conditioning wasn't a punishment, it was a technological modification. It was designed to radically alter their physiology and their brain chemistry, making their nervous systems highly attuned to capturing and processing paranormal frequencies and dimensional energies.
I want you at home to close your eyes and really picture this scenario. You are standing in the pitch black of this stone labyrinth, 60 feet underground. The cave is shaped like a giant, echoing human body. A priest stands at the focal point and chants into the red ochre wall,
Sending shockwaves everywhere.
His voice booms like physical thunder, vibrating through the limestone and through your very skeleton. And sitting perfectly still in the resonant chambers are these massive, physically altered androgynous mediums. They are using the massive acoustic amplification of the hypogeum, combined with their altered brainwaves, to literally dial into other dimensions.
The hypogeum wasn't a burial ground. It was a massive prehistoric machine. It was a stone radio.
A stone radio designed to communicate with the unseen. That is brilliant.
It perfectly synthesizes Charroux's entire thesis of the prehistoric world. If we connect this acoustic architecture back to the earlier idea of the marvelous, we see that for these ancient people, the supernatural wasn't a matter of blind, dogmatic faith. It was an applied science.
They were engineering it.
They used the hard physics of sound, combined with the manipulated biology of the mediums, to elevate human consciousness and literally pierce the veil between our physical world and the parallel universes Charroux described in the first chapter.
It's technology. It's just not the kind of technology we recognize because it doesn't use wires or lithium batteries. It's spiritual technology.
Wow.
It's biological and acoustic reality hacking. And speaking of hacking reality to achieve a goal, this brings us to a massive turning point in Charroux's book and the transition into the second half of our deep dive. Because the mysterious unknown, as Charroux calls it, isn't just confined to the foggy mists of prehistory or forgotten caves in Malta.
Right. It continues.
These esoteric, hidden threads of magic, sympathetic resonance, and dimensional manipulation weave right out of the prehistoric darkness and directly into the era of documented, recorded history. And Charroux tracks this through Chapter 6, focusing on one of the most famous, pivotal men to ever live, Christopher Columbus.
This is where Charroux's analysis of history becomes acutely, uncomfortably subversive for the modern reader. We are all taught a very specific sanitized narratives in grade school. We are taught that Columbus was a brave, perhaps deeply flawed, Genoese navigator.
A guy looking for spices.
Exactly. We are told he was looking for a faster, secular trade route to the spices of India, and he simply made a mathematical miscalculation regarding the Earth's circumference, accidentally bumping into the Americas. Charroux, leaning heavily on the extensive, groundbreaking archival research of Spanish historian Salvador de Madariaga, tears this conventional narrative to absolute shreds.
He exposes the hidden Columbus?
The hidden Columbus, yes.
Yeah.
Madariaga's work is fascinating because it suggests that almost everything we know about Columbus's identity is a carefully constructed lie. Madariaga's research suggests that Columbus was a converso.
Yes. A converso, in the context of 15th century Spain, was a Jew whose family had formally converted to Catholicism to escape the brutal persecution and death sentences of the Spanish Inquisition.
Right.
However, many conversos secretly maintained their Jewish faith, language, and traditions behind closed doors. But Madariaga and Charroux suggest Columbus went much further than just secretly observing the Sabbath. They argue he was deeply entrenched in the esoteric and the occult, specifically Jewish Kabbalistic magic.
And this completely recontextualizes his entire voyage. His true motivations for sailing west into the terrifying, uncharted Atlantic had absolutely nothing to do with finding a cheaper route for nutmeg and silk.
Not all.
Columbus was driven by a profound, fanatical, almost terrifying religious and mystical mission. Based on his own writings, he genuinely believed he was personally chosen by God, fashioning himself as a prophesied figure, a new Moses or a new King David.
His ultimate stated goal in acquiring the immense wealth of the Indies was not to enrich the Spanish crown for secular purposes. He explicitly wanted to use the gold to fund a final apocalyptic crusade to conquer the Holy Land and physically rebuild the Temple of Jerusalem.
That was his obsession.
Furthermore, he believed he was destined to find the terrestrial paradise, the literal Garden of Eden, which he believed was a physical, geographic location on Earth. He was so consumed by this mystical timeline that he even wrote a book of prophecies, mathematically predicting that the end of the world would occur in the year 1656.
He wasn't a rational scientist making a navigational error. He was a radical mystic following a divine or perhaps demonic mandate. But I have to push back here. Anyone can be a religious zealot. Kings and explorers throughout history used religious destiny as an excuse for conquest.
Right.
What makes Charroux think Columbus was actively using magic to achieve this? Where is the hard proof of the mysterious unknown operating here?
The proof, Charroux argues, lies in something so seemingly mundane that historians gloss right over it, his signature. Columbus almost never signed his name normally. On his most important documents, he utilized a bizarre, highly structured, triangular, pyramidal cipher.
Right. Let's break this cipher down because it's the smoking gun of Chapter 6. It wasn't just a messy autograph. It consisted of letters arranged in a very specific hierarchical pyramid.
How is it laid out?
At the very top, a single S. On the second line, the letters S, A, and S. On the third line, the letters X, M, and Y. And beneath that pyramid, he would write Expo Ferens, which translates to Christ bearer.
To a conventional historian, it's just a quirky, pious abbreviation. But Charroux breaks down the esoteric mechanics of this cipher. First, he notes a crucial detail. To properly understand the triangular arrangement, you have to read the letters from right to left.
Which is exactly the way Hebrew is read, powerfully reinforcing Madariaga's theory that Columbus was a secret converso operating within Jewish mystical traditions.
Precisely. But it's the specific combination of the letters, particularly when read right to left on the bottom row Y, M, X, or when combined vertically into sequences like X, S, M, A, Y, that takes this from a secret religious nod into the realm of dark magic.
And this is where it shifts.
Charroux claims that in specific, highly guarded Kabbalistic traditions, these letter combinations are not abbreviations for saints. They are phonetic keys used to invoke specific, powerful Jewish magical entities.
Okay, this is where it gets genuinely dark. Who are these entities? Charroux argues that this signature invoked a trinity of spirits. Charetz, Sikiel, and most importantly, Samael. And Samael is not a friendly patron saint of sailors. In various esoteric and Talmudic traditions, Samael is equated with the angel of death, the primary accuser, or essentially Satan himself.
Charroux argues that Columbus's signature was not a name at all. It was an active, magical talisman. It was a binding spell written on paper.
A literal pact.
Columbus, preparing to head into the terrifying, completely uncharted void of the Atlantic Ocean, wasn't merely trusting in his astrolabe and the wind. He was casting a massive sympathetic spell. He made a deliberate occult pact with Samel and these demonic entities to protect his ships from the inevitable deadly storms of the Atlantic and to magically guarantee the success of his apocalyptic mission.
Wait, hold on. I need to process this. Are you seriously telling me that Charroux's thesis is that the European discovery of the Americas, arguably the single most transformative geographical event in human history, was essentially the direct result of a demonic, Kabbalistic spell cast by a sea captain who wore a magic talisman next to his skin?
That is exactly his thesis.
How can he possibly substantiate that a spell actually worked? Couldn't he just have gotten lucky with the weather?
That is exactly what conformist history claims extraordinary luck. But Charroux points to the bizarre, almost unnatural reality of the 1492 voyage itself to substantiate the efficacy of the pact. The expedition was not a standard nautical journey. It was characterized by anomalies that defied meteorological and navigational logic.
The demonic voyage.
Yes. For instance, the weather was miraculously, impossibly calm for an unprecedented stretch of time, traversing an ocean known for sudden, violent squalls. Even more telling were the compass variations.
What happened with the compasses?
As they sailed further west, the compass needles began to deviate wildly from true north, a terrifying phenomenon that should have logically caused an immediate violent mutiny among the terrified crew.
They should have turned back immediately.
Yet Columbus, seemingly possessing an almost hypnotic, supernatural authority, easily explained it away, bending the will of his crew with unnatural ease. Charroux suggests these are not historical coincidences. They are the tangible atmospheric and psychological results of the magical pact-altering probability.
It reads less like a noble expedition of scientific discovery and more like the grim fulfillment of a dark, supernatural bargain. And honestly, it makes horrifying sense when you look at the immediate aftermath.
The aftermath is brutal.
The arrival in the Americas didn't usher in a golden age of Christian charity and enlightenment. It immediately initiated a horrific harvest of blood, slavery, and gold. The unfathomable cruelties inflicted upon the indigenous populations by Columbus and his men seem completely divorced from the teachings of Christ, but they align perfectly with the chaotic, destructive energy of a dark, magical enterprise overseen by the Angel of Death.
It forces the reader to confront a deeply uncomfortable view of history. Why would a figure like Columbus resort to this? If we ground this specific historical event in Charroux's broader theory of the marvelous, it highlights exactly how the mysterious unknown operates in the shadows.
How powerful people use it.
Powerful, world-altering figures throughout history rarely rely solely on raw logic. They often rely on occult knowledge, numerology, Kabbalism, sympathetic magic, talismans to literally bend the fabric of reality to their will. Orthodox history aggressively suppresses this because a magical pact cannot be quantified in a peer-reviewed journal.
Right, you can't measure a spell.
But Charroux argues that to understand the true turning points of human civilization, we must acknowledge the active role of the irrational, the magical, and the occult.
Columbus manipulated the very fabric of probability using ancient knowledge. And that realization opens the floodgates for chapters 7 through 10, which Charroux groups as glimpses of the unknown: magic, flesh, and fire.
Because if Columbus could do it.
Exactly, because if Columbus could hack the Matrix to calm the Atlantic Ocean, he certainly isn't the only one who figured out how to break the rules. If reality is that easily hacked, where is the physical proof in the modern era? Charroux provides it, detailing documented instances where the ironclad laws of physics simply disintegrate.
Having established that the marvelous can shape grand historical narratives, Charroux moves to demonstrate how it can shape immediate physical matter. He begins the section in Chapter 9 with a visceral examination of Agpahoa, the famous psychic surgeon from the Philippines.
Right, psychic surgery. This is something that modern medical science entirely dismisses as sleight of hand with chicken blood.
Pure illusion.
But Charroux treats it as a legitimate manifestation of the marvelous. Explain the mechanics of this, because it sounds physically impossible.
It is physically impossible under the current paradigm of terrestrial physics. Agbawa was heavily documented plunging his bare, unsterilized hands directly into the torsos and abdomens of his patients to remove tumors and diseased tissue.
Bare hands.
He utilized no scalpels, administered no anesthesia, and crucially, once he withdrew his hands, the body sealed back up seamlessly, leaving no scar, no bleeding, and no sign of trauma.
Charroux describes it in an incredibly visceral way. He says Agpoa treats human flesh as if it were as fluid as water.
Mm.
How does a human hand pass through a rib cage? Are we talking about a localized manipulation of atomic bonds?
In Charroux's framework, yes, the surgeon is not cutting flesh. He is utilizing the psychology of the marvelous to temporarily alter the physical state of the patient's matter. By applying a specific frequency of will or spiritual energy, the atomic bonds of the flesh lose their rigidity, parting like a liquid and then instantly rebonding when the intention is removed.
Wow.
It is a profound, localized violation of terrestrial physics.
And he pairs this biological manipulation of flesh with the manipulation of inanimate matter, mentioning the Belmez faces in Chapter 8.
The Belmez phenomena occurred in a rural house in Spain. Over a period of years, highly detailed, deeply haunting portraits of human faces continuously appeared, faded, moved, and morphed on the solid concrete hearth of the home's fireplace.
Just out of nowhere.
Excavations later revealed the house was built directly over an ancient mass tomb.
Again, scientists tried to prove it was a hoax painted with chemicals, but they couldn't. Charroux argues the concrete itself was acting as a physical canvas for something entirely non-physical. The emotional or dimensional energy of the tomb was bleeding through the barrier and altering the molecular structure of the cement to form images.
It's matter responding to unseen forces.
And it isn't just localized phenomena. In Chapter 7, Charroux touches upon the historical grimoire known as the Book of Magic of the Great Albert. He discusses the esoteric concept of distance magic telepathy, or the ability to physically affect reality or communicate across vast distances instantaneously.
How does that work mechanically? Because the Great Albert isn't talking about radio waves.
It works on the principle of sympathetic magic, which is essentially a pre-scientific understanding of quantum entanglement. The theory posits that all matter and consciousness are fundamentally connected at a dimensional level.
So distance doesn't matter.
If you possess the correct occult knowledge and exert enough concentrated will, you can bypass physical distance entirely, communicating or causing physical effects miles away. It is physics driven by human will rather than particle accelerators.
But perhaps the most dramatic, undeniable example Charroux provides of reality breaking down is the mystery of fire, which he explores in Chapter 10. He draws a stark, terrifying contrast between the rational laws of fire and the magical laws of fire.
He points first to the horrific, undeniable realities of modern warfare and industry. He cites weapons like napalm or the unimaginable horrors of the Holocaust ovens, where fire is a purely destructive, unforgiving chemical force. Under the laws of terrestrial chemistry, fire consumes organic flesh rapidly and without prejudice. That is the rational physical law of combustion. But then, Charroux contrasts this ironclad law with the biblical account of Nebuchadnezzar's furnace in the book of Daniel.
The story of Ananias, Misael, and Azarias. King Nebuchadnezzar builds a giant furnace and orders it heated 7 times hotter than normal, a fire so intensely violent that the radiant heat instantly kills the guards who throw the 3 men inside.
But the men themselves.
The men themselves fall into the flames and simply stand up. They walk around inside the inferno completely unharmed, and when they are pulled out, they don't even smell like smoke. Their clothes aren't even singed.
To a conformist historian or a modern theologian, this is merely a myth, a poetic allegory about faith. But Charroux treats it as a factual, historical account of the mysterious unknown in action. He argues that this event proves the existence of individuals who possess a profound connection to a parallel universe, or an innate understanding of its superior laws.
So they didn't put the fire out. The fire was still burning at 1,000 degrees.
Exactly. Chemical combustion continued. But the effects of that combustion were entirely nullified by a superior law. These men, through faith, genetics, or occult knowledge, generated a dimensional shielding.
A force field, essentially.
They temporarily overlaid the physical laws of a parallel universe where fire perhaps does not consume onto their immediate physical space, rendering them completely immune to terrestrial thermodynamics.
So how do we, as modern, rational listeners, reconcile this absolute chaos? We have human flesh turning to liquid water, concrete painting itself with ghosts, telepathy mimicking quantum entanglement, and fire that simply refuses to burn human skin.
It's a lot to take in.
Are the laws of physics, as we understand them, not actually laws at all? Are they just a localized set of rules? Are there just the default factory settings of this specific dimension, and certain people like Akpawa or the men in the furnace or Columbus with his cipher know how to access the universe's developer console and rewrite those rules?
That is an exceptionally elegant way to frame Charroux's entire thesis. If we tie these historical anomalies back to the very beginning of our deep dive, back to the impossible, 15-centimeter stairs carved into the cliff face of Sigiriya, we arrive at a unified theory.
It's all connected.
The people performing these physical feats are operating on those exact same paths to nowhere. They're temporarily stepping out of the rigid mathematical framework of terrestrial physics, and they are consciously tapping in to the superior rules of the parallel, mysterious universe that Charroux described. They're utilizing the forgotten psychology of the marvelous to completely override the physical world.
They're walking up the invisible stairs. Which brings us, finally, to the grand finale of Charroux's argument in Chapter 11. If reality is this malleable, if our history is this heavily suppressed, influenced by extraterrestrials, subterranean empires, and Kabbalistic pacts, what is the true origin of our species?
Where do we come from?
Where do we actually come from? To answer this, Charroux looks at the Sibylline, highly symbolic language of nature and explores the darkest, most ancient, and most heavily censored myth of all.
To conclude his massive thesis, Charroux argues that the absolute truth of our origins isn't hidden in a glass case in a museum, and it isn't buried in a Darwinian fossil record. It is hidden in deep myth and in the seemingly bizarre, irrational behaviors of nature itself.
Nature speaks to us.
He suggests that nature constantly speaks to us in omens, communicating in a Sibylline language of symbols that we have completely forgotten how to read.
He gives a really quirky, almost funny example of this to prove his point. He talks about an incident in 1971 in the Lot-et-Garonne region of France. Local gardeners went out to their fields and noticed something biologically impossible. An entire crop of broad beans had grown completely upside down.
The pods were inverted on the stalk.
Right. Now, local peasant folklore immediately interpreted this bizarre biological anomaly as a dark omen of impending calamity.
Now, Charroux intellectually admits that no grand, catastrophic event actually happened in France that year. But the literal truth of the omen isn't his point. The point is the mechanism of communication.
How nature behaves.
Nature behaves in ways that routinely defy agricultural and biological logic, communicating in a language of symbols, anomalies, and mutations that our strictly rational minds instantly dismiss as statistical noise.
We misinterpret the signs because we have lost the contextual dictionary. And Charroux argues that the greatest misinterpreted sign, the most profound suppressed truth in all of human history, is the true identity of our original ancestor.
This is the big reveal.
He completely bypasses the biblical story of Eve and Adam's rib and introduces a figure that conformist theology has tried to bury for millennia. Lilith.
Lilith. In modern, diluted pop culture, if she is mentioned at all, she is lazily dismissed as a generic demon, a creature of the night who strangles infants in their cribs. But Charroux bypasses the later demonology and resurrects much older, far more radical, and deeply esoteric traditions.
He introduces Lilith not as a fallen demon, but as the absolute first human creature, created long before Adam.
And her origin story is entirely different. He refers to her, provocatively, as the grandmother devil. According to the ancient texts and traditions Charroux explores, Lilith was not made from a subservient piece of a man's rib. She was modeled directly from the primal, energized red clay of the newborn earth.
And she was perfect, right?
Crucially, she achieved a state of biological perfection that we can barely comprehend. She was capable of reproducing entirely on her own. She gave birth via parthenogenesis, meaning biological replication without the need for fertilization by a male partner.
Let's expand on the biology of parthenogenesis because it is vital to Charroux's theory. Parthenogenesis exists in nature today, in certain reptiles, insects, and fish, where an unfertilized egg develops into a fully formed clone of the mother. Charroux posits that the original perfected human prototype Lilith possessed this capability. She was self-replicating. She is the ultimate mater.
Wait, mater. This perfectly aligns with the archaeology we discussed earlier.
Yeah.
This connects directly back to Malta and the Halsaflini hypogeum. Those headless, obese, completely breastless statues, the three enormous, that Christus Ilf called sensitives. They weren't just mediums, they were representations of this exact concept. They represent an androgynous, self-contained, self-replicating origin point for humanity. They are monuments to Lilith.
It is a stunning conceptual synthesis, and Charroux does not view Lilith as an entity of evil despite the devil moniker. He suggests that this autonomous grandmother devil bequeathed to her descendants as our most defining, powerful traits.
We didn't inherit our nature from Adam.
We did not inherit docile obedience from Adam. We inherited our intelligence, our cunning, our refusal to submit, and our insatiable demonic curiosity directly from Lilith.
It is a breathtaking, almost dizzying reevaluation of the human origin story.
Oh.
Charroux essentially saying that our driving force, the very spark that makes us uniquely human, the thing that makes us build civilizations and question the universe, is not a gentle divine breath from a benevolent creator.
It's much fiercer.
It is a fierce, inquisitive, rebellious, deeply occult energy inherited from a self-created, parthenogenic matriarch made of red clay.
Okay, let's step back and attempt to summarize the sheer, staggering magnitude of the narrative Charroux has constructed for us. If we accept his premises, our family tree does not start with a terrestrial ape slowly learning to use a femur bone as a club over millions of years.
Whoa.
And it certainly does not start with a docile naked man in a pristine garden. According to Charroux, humanity as we know it is the complex, distant, hybridized descendant of highly advanced extraterrestrial initiators who established cosmic quarantine bases in the frozen north, combined with the biological legacy of a self-replicating grandmother devil who passed down a permanent genetic legacy of demonic cunning and reality-bending potential.
I know this sounds utterly, wildly absurd to the modern, scientifically trained ear, but Charroux emphasizes with deep philosophical conviction exactly why understanding this matters. Believing in these myths, or at least fiercely engaging with the profound psychological truths hidden behind them, isn't just a fun exercise in reading fantasy novels.
Why does it matter then?
As Charroux argues, when we sever our ties with these ancient esoteric traditions, when we arrogantly dismiss the marvelous, the magical, and the mythical in favor of cold, sterile, conformist rationalism, we effectively cut our own umbilical cord to nature and the cosmos.
We isolate ourselves in a tiny, boring box of our own making. Embracing the mystery, acknowledging the extraterrestrial, the subterranean, and yes, even the demonic, rebellious aspects of our heritage, is the only thing that gives humanity its true character and its ultimate cosmic purpose.
It restores our rightful place in a universe that is far grander, far stranger, and infinitely more malleable than conformist history will ever allow you to believe.
It re-enchants the world. It makes the world terrifying, but it makes it alive. And honestly, it makes looking at old stone ruins, questioning Orthodox history books, and staring up at the night sky a hell of a lot more exciting. The analysis will continue.
Indeed it will. The mysteries are far from exhausted.
But before we officially sign off, I want to leave you, the listener, with one final provocative thought to mull over tonight. We talked about how Lilith passed down her demonic curiosity and her cunning to us. If Charroux's grand theory is right, perhaps our modern, desperate, multi-billion-dollar drive to build massive rockets, to explore the stars, and to uncover the very mysteries of quantum physics isn't just a product of linear scientific progress. Maybe it is a literal genetic echo.
Calling us home.
A biological homing beacon vibrating in our DNA, calling us back to the extraterrestrial initiation centers we originally came from. When we look at Mars or Venus, are we looking at dead rocks, or are we just trying to find our way back to school? Thank you guys so much for tuning in to this incredibly deep dive on the English BookCast. If you had your mind completely blown today by subterranean empires and ancient acoustic technology, make sure to smash that like button, subscribe to the channel for more massive deep dives into the weird, the wonderful, and the suppressed, and drop a comment below on what you think about Columbus's magic pact. Did he hack the Atlantic Ocean, or was he just lucky? Let me know. See you in the next one.
Which is exactly why, when you dive directly into the deeper layers of Robert Charroux's Book of the Mysterious Past, you have to take every single neat, tidy Sunday school narrative you've ever been taught about human origins and just throw it out completely.
Yeah, you really do. It's a total paradigm shift.
Right, because we aren't looking at the standard Genesis story here, like at all. We are exploring these incredibly ancient, fiercely nonconformist traditions that suggest a beginning that is, well, infinitely more complex than a rib and an apple.
Absolutely.
And the gateway to this whole alternate history, for you listening, it centers on a figure who has essentially been scrubbed from mainstream consciousness. I'm talking about Lilith.
Yes, Lilith. It is a profound shift in perspective. To really grasp the gravity of this, you have to realize we aren't dealing with some recent, fringe internet theory.
Right.
We are talking about ancient Talmudic legends, texts that state completely unequivocally that Eve was not the first woman.
Which just blows my mind every time I hear it.
I mean, it should. The first woman was Lilith, and the descriptions of her in chapter 12 are really striking because they just completely upend that traditional dynamic we're all so used to.
How so? Like, physically?
Well, physically and fundamentally, she isn't portrayed as this subservient companion, right? Like someone hastily created just to keep a lonely guy company.
Right, right.
Lilith is depicted as breathtakingly beautiful. She's specifically characterized by this long, flowing hair. But more importantly, she is the initiator.
The initiator.
Yeah, she is the active force. She's the one introducing both men and women to the profound secrets of love and lust.
Okay, let's unpack this for a second, though, because I really want to focus on the actual mechanics of her creation.
Sure.
Because the contrast in this text between how Lilith is made versus how Eve is made,
Yeah.
that is the foundation of this entire argument, isn't it?
It really is, yeah.
Because according to these older traditions, Adam and Lilith were absolute equals in their genesis. They were both modeled from the exact same raw material, which was the red clay of the newborn earth.
Yeah. Exactly, the same dirt.
But there is this very specific phrase Charroux uses to describe Lilith. It says she was modeled with a, quote, particular perfection.
Ah, yes.
What does that actually imply? Like, was she a better draft?
Well, that phrase carries immense philosophical weight, actually. Particular perfection suggests that in this initial attempt at crafting human life from the primordial clay, the female form, or at least Lilith's specific embodiment of it, was actually the superior design.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, she was a more refined execution of the material. But as the legend goes, this union of equals doesn't last. When Adam is ultimately expelled from this terrestrial paradise, he doesn't leave with his equal. He abandons Lilith.
And the reason for that abandonment is what I can only describe as like the ultimate narcissism.
Oh, entirely.
Because Adam doesn't choose Eve because she possesses that particular perfection Lilith had. He chooses Eve because she was carved out of his own flesh and blood.
So unwritten.
Right. So essentially, he prefers himself. If we think about that, isn't that literally the very first recorded echo chamber in human history?
I love that framing. The original echo chamber.
Right. He actively rejects the independent, perfected creation that was Lilith, and he chooses to surround himself with a fractured piece of his own ego.
He rejects the other in favor of a reflection of the self. And this aligns perfectly with a much broader philosophical concept that the source material points to, specifically Plato's Symposium.
Oh, the banquet text.
Right. Plato discusses this incredibly old, widespread legend suggesting that the original human being was actually born as an androgyne, a hermaphrodite.
Wait, the first human?
Yes. The idea is that the first complete human entity contained both male and female principles in perfect balance.
Okay, wait, let me make sure I'm following this. If Adam represents this original hermaphroditic being and he is somehow separated into two forms, choosing Eve is literally choosing to bond with his own biological and psychic material.
Yes. Exactly. But to fully grasp the radical nature of this alternate history, we actually have to push past Adam and Lilith entirely.
Wait, further?
Much further back. The traditions point to an even older, more esoteric concept. They call it the mater, the mother of mothers.
The actual biological number one.
Precisely. The premise here is that before any division into male and female even happened, the absolute first human creature was an asexual or hermaphroditic mother.
Okay.
A being that gave birth not through, biological pairing with another, but through parthenogenesis.
Let's define that for anyone who hasn't taken a biology class in a while. Parthenogenesis essentially means virgin birth, right? Like an organism reproducing entirely on its own without fertilization.
Correct. It's a form of asexual reproduction where embryos grow and develop without any fertilization by a male.
Wow.
And by suggesting that the root of our entire genealogical tree is this solitary, self-replicating mother figure, it fundamentally alters the hierarchy of creation.
And totally flips it.
Right. It establishes the anteriority, the prior existence and supremacy of the feminine principle long before male-dominated narratives, rewrote the script.
And what happens to the source of knowledge in this rewritten script? Because you can't have a Genesis story without a serpent.
Very true.
We are completely conditioned to view the snake as this symbol of pure malice and temptation. But if the whole hierarchy is flipped, I'm assuming the serpent's role is flipped too.
Oh, absolutely. In these esoteric traditions, the serpent is not a deceiver at all. The source cites Paracelsus, the Renaissance physician and alchemist.
Right.
And Paracelsus held the belief that during the initial act of creation, the serpent actually possessed the ability to speak.
A talking snake.
A talking snake. And more importantly, by a special privilege granted by the divine, the serpent retained the knowledge of the universe's greatest mysteries.
So the serpent is literally the keeper of the cosmic secrets.
Yes. Therefore, when Lilith or Eve in the later altered versions interacts with the serpent, it is not a fall into depravity like we're traditionally taught. It is an initiation. It is the deliberate transfer of profound hidden knowledge. The quest for understanding is reframed here not as some sin of disobedience, but as a necessary evolution, one initiated by the original keeper of secrets.
Okay, but this brings up a massive logistical problem for me.
Okay.
If our true origins are this deeply layered, you know, hermaphroditic mothers,
Yeah.
red clay perfection, parthenogenesis, and talking serpents holding cosmic secrets, how is any of this history preserved?
That is the big question.
Right. If we're throwing out the stone tablets and the accepted ancient scrolls, where is the proof of this narrative?
And that leads to one of the most provocative arguments in this entire philosophical framework moving into chapter 13. The argument is that this true history isn't written on anything external.
Meaning?
It is written directly inside of you. It is recorded in your biology.
You mean literally written, like a biological alphabet?
Yes. We have to shift from mythology to cellular biology for a second. The premise is that our chromosomes constitute literal, quote-unquote, biological writing. Within the nucleus of a human cell, we have 46 chromosomes, right? Formed when the sperm and the egg combine, engendering 23 groupings.
Right. 23 from the mother, 23 from the father.
Exactly. The theory posits that these 23 pairs act as the base for an alphabet, a 23-letter biological alphabet.
That is wild.
And just as letters on a page combine to form words and sentences, these chromosomal groups combine to spell out what the text refers to as your chromosomal name.
And this isn't just your civil name, right? This isn't John or Sarah.
No. The chromosomal name is described as a person's true, divine, and entirely unpronounceable identity.
Unpronounceable?
Yes. It is the sacred core of who you are, written in genetic ink long before you were born. It carries the undiluted qualities of all your ancestors. Your civil name is totally arbitrary. It can be changed by signing a piece of paper.
Right.
But your chromosomal name is the unalterable truth of your existence.
I am struggling with the mechanism here, though.
How so?
Well, the text makes a huge leap, claiming that actual human-created ancient alphabets are derived from this microscopic genetic code. It lists specific letters. Sanskrit letters like A, P, M, L, and Phoenician letters like Y, X, E.
It does.
But how does an ancient Phoenician know what a chromosome looks like to carve it into a clay tablet? They didn't have electron microscopes. How does the biological code become a written language?
That is the crucial question, and the explanation lies in a concept that's sort of similar to Carl Jung's collective unconscious, but pushed to a radical biological extreme.
Okay, I'm listening.
The theory argues that we possess genetic memory. The shapes, the structures, and the vibrational realities of our internal biological makeup are subconsciously projected outward.
Projected outward.
Yes. When early humans felt the impulse to communicate and began carving shapes into stone or clay, they were not inventing abstract symbols from thin air.
They were drawing themselves.
Exactly. They were driven by an unconscious, intuitive compulsion to externalize the physical shapes of their own genetic material. The internal biological script essentially forced itself into the external world.
So language isn't an invention at all. It's an instinctual projection of our cellular structure.
Oh.
That is just wild.
It is.
But it also sets up a terrifying premise, because if this chromosomal alphabet is our divine identity, then tampering with it must be the ultimate taboo. Which brings us to this alternate definition of original sin that the book talks about.
Right. If you follow this logic, original sin has absolutely nothing to do with a garden, a fruit, or disobeying a rule.
According to this framework, the ultimate sin-like, the truly unpardonable crime against the cosmos, is the modification of this genetic code. It is the trafficking of genes.
Yes.
And I want to get your take on this, because the example the text uses to illustrate this is incredibly dark. It asks you to imagine a tyrant who triggers some sort of cataclysm that wipes out 3 billion human lives, leaving only a tiny handful of survivors, like 100 people.
A horrific tragedy by any human standard.
Right, an unimaginable tragedy. But the text argues that in the cosmic sense, this is actually not a sin.
Right.
Why? Because as long as the genetic code of those 100 survivors remains entirely intact and unmanipulated, the world can restart. The fundamental essence of humanity hasn't been lost.
Exactly.
However, if a scientist takes a single human being and alters their genetic code, that is the true sin.
I have to push back here, though.
Please do.
What about curing genetic diseases? What about using CRISPR to remove a gene that causes horrific suffering? Does this philosophy view that as an unpardonable sin?
Under the strict parameters of this philosophy, yes, it likely would.
Wow.
Because the theory operates on what it terms the racist law of the universe. And it is vital to understand that it uses the word racist purely in the biological sense of species preservation, not in our modern sociological context.
Right, so biological integrity. Exactly. The law states that the integrity of a species code must remain inviolate. To modify a person's identity by swapping or altering their genes is to permanently destroy their sacred ego.
You're severing the link.
You are irreversibly severing them from the divine program. The argument is that physical suffering or even near extinction of the entire race is preferable to the corruption of the divine biological alphabet.
That is a staggering way to view modern science. Because this isn't just ancient history we're talking about. This is happening right now. The text specifically calls out biologists at the University of Oxford who were successfully marrying plant cells with animal cells.
Yeah, they were hybridizing the very fabric of heredity at the cellular level.
Exactly. And rather than celebrating that as a massive scientific triumph, this framework asks us, is the literal biblical fall of man happening right now in our laboratory?
That's a haunting question.
Like, when we start bartering chromosomes and creating hybrids that defy the established biological alphabet, are we precipitating our own species into nothingness?
When you view genetic manipulation as the ultimate cosmic crime, it forces you to reevaluate the ancient myths entirely. It explains why so many disparate ancient traditions seem to harbor this deep-seated terror of the pursuit of knowledge.
Right.
And more specifically, why they universally scapegoat women for it.
Yes, because it isn't just the Bible blaming Eve. The source points out that the Chinese Qing, which predates the Bible, says that women, quote, launched us into slavery and are the stairs by which all evils descended.
It's brutal.
It really is. And the Iranian Zendavesta features a dark spirit in the form of a cobra tricking the first couple.
It's a completely universal pattern of blame. But if the esoteric core of the sin of knowledge was always understood to be the manipulation of life itself, the secrets of the biological code, then framing women as the culprits takes on a whole new meaning.
How so?
It reads as a distorted patriarchal echo of the fear of that original mater.
The mother of mothers.
Yes, the mother of mothers who held the terrifying power of parthenogenesis. The fear of female biological power and the fear of genetic manipulation became completely intertwined and demonized in the mythology over millennia.
Okay, so if the biological code is this sacred, untouchable script, the next logical question we have to ask is, where did the canvas come from?
Right.
How was life and the universe that holds it actually formed? Because moving into chapter 14, this framework completely rejects the traditional Western theology of creatio ex nihilo.
Which is the idea that God created the world out of absolute nothingness.
Exactly. It completely rejects that.
It does. It introduces the theological concept borrowed from Hindu tradition, specifically from the Bhagavad Purana. And what's fascinating here is the terminology used to describe the creation of the universe. It is abrasive, but deliberately so.
Very abrasive.
It states that the Supreme, being Brahma in this context, did not create the universe. He vomited it.
That is such a visceral, almost repulsive image. I mean, why use that specific word?
Well, we have to look at the mechanical and philosophical difference between creating and vomiting.
Okay.
To create something implies the use of external matter. A carpenter uses wood, a potter uses clay. The creator exists over here, and the object they made exists over there. They are totally separate entities.
But vomiting implies that the universe is made entirely of the creator's own internal substance.
Precisely. It is not external matter that was somehow shaped. It is a direct emanation of the self. Therefore, the creation participates entirely in the nature of the creator.
It's part of the creator.
If the universe was vomited by the divine, then every single particle of the universe is divine. There is absolutely no separation between the maker and the made. It is a closed loop of divine substance.
And the timeline given for this process is totally mind-bending.
Oh, the incubation period.
Yes.
Yeah.
It describes the Supreme Being incubating inside a brilliant egg for exactly 1 year in divine time. But 1 divine year equals 3,110,400 human years.
It's incredibly specific.
Right. That is how long the universe was gestating within the divine substance, before it was emanated, before pure thought separated it into heaven and earth.
And because everything is constructed of this singular divine substance, our conventional understanding of physics completely breaks down here, particularly our perception of time.
Right, because time is a human construct.
Exactly. This introduces the concept of space-time and the Hindu principle of Maya, which translates roughly to illusion. The argument is that our perception of past, present, and future as separate sequential events is a total fabrication.
An illusion.
It is an illusion created just to satisfy our limited, lazy human consciousness. In reality, past, present, and future coincide. They exist simultaneously as a single block.
I have to bring up the steak analogy here because it is honestly the most bizarre yet effective way to explain this space-time block.
It really is.
So next time you, the listener, sit down to eat a piece of grilled meat, you probably think you were just sitting at a table in the present moment, satisfying your hunger.
You view it as a simple, isolated action in the now.
Right. But this philosophy argues that you are actually consuming the illusion of time itself, because that steak contains within it the calf that it came from.
Yes.
But it doesn't stop there. It contains the biological process of the calf's digestion. It contains the grass the calf ate and the sunlight that grew the grass centuries ago.
The whole chain.
Exactly.
Right.
When you eat that steak, all of those supposedly past events are entirely present within the physical matter you are consuming. You are interacting with an indivisible space-time block where the calf's past, its digestion, and your present action of eating are all occurring simultaneously.
It forces a realization that nothing exists in isolation. It echoes the Hermetic axiom, as above, so below. And the text applies this to a human life, too.
How so?
The first breath of a child is not a new, isolated beginning. That breath contains the semen of the father, the ancestry of the grandfather, stretching in an unbroken chain all the way back to the origin. The universe is not a timeline. It is an instantaneous phenomenon.
But I'm really struggling with this. If time is an illusion, and everything from the grass to the calf to my dinner is happening simultaneously in this divine emanation, what about free will? Right?
Oh.
If the past and present are a single block, doesn't that mean the future is already vomited out too? Are we just moving through a pre-recorded reality?
That is the ultimate paradox of the block universe theory. If all moments exist simultaneously within the divine substance, then our experience of making a choice is simply our consciousness encountering a pre-existing coordinate in space-time.
Wow.
The framework suggests that our sense of agency is just another layer of Maya, another illusion. We are merely observing the divine emanation from a localized, linear perspective.
If we accept that everything is a singular emanation made of the Creator's own substance, then it leads to a truly staggering conclusion about the world around us. And this brings us to chapter 15.
Right.
There can be no such thing as dead matter.
Exactly. If the universe is vomited from the divine, then every particle must retain some spark of that divine intelligence. The argument is that life has no beginning and no end. It is a fundamental continuum.
It's everywhere.
The source points to observations by astronomers and physicists who find complex organic compounds, like amino acids, forming in the near vacuum and absolute cold of interstellar space. Life is not a freak biological accident localized on Earth. It is an inherent, inescapable property of the cosmos.
And if everything possesses life, then everything must possess a soul, or at least some form of intelligence.
Yeah.
But we need to define what we mean by soul in this context, because we aren't talking about, like, a ghost floating in the clouds.
No, the classical definition utilized here is intensely practical. The soul is defined simply as intelligence in a state of activity.
Intelligence in activity.
Yes, it is the operating mechanism that bridges physical perception and intellectual effect. But the profound question is, where does this intelligence, this active soul, actually reside within the human physical form?
And here's where it gets really interesting, because the text takes a turn into the absurd, but it connects surprisingly well to modern science. You would naturally assume the seat of the soul is the brain.
Or maybe the heart.
Right, the heart. But the source cites Georges Cabanis and the French encyclopedists, who posited a wildly different theory. They linked the soul, the seat of human intelligence and deep emotion, directly to the lower viscera.
Specifically to the large intestine.
It sounds like a complete joke to our modern ears, to place the soul in the bowels.
It does sound funny. But consider the underlying logic they used. They observed that the state of our internal organs, particularly the gut, deeply and immediately affects our capacity to feel, to reason, and to experience the world.
Right.
Diseases or imbalances in the viscera perturb the habitual order of our sentiments.
But they didn't just speak in generalities, they actually measured it.
Yeah.
The text claims there is a direct physical correlation between the length of a person's large intestine and their personality and spiritual depth.
Yes, the measurements are fascinating.
It states that pragmatic, driven individuals in history, the quote-unquote men of action, invariably have short intestines, measuring under a meter.
And on the opposite end of the spectrum, you have the mystics, the philosophers, the deeply religious visionaries.
Right. And it claims that these profound mystics suffer from chronic constipation because their large intestines are incredibly long, sometimes up to 2 meters.
2 meters of the intestine.
Yeah. And because the intestine is so long, the food stays in the system longer, and their bodies absorb a massive amount of toxins back into their bloodstream. And it is precisely these reabsorbed toxins that condition their brains to experience elevated, pure spiritual states.
It is a profoundly materialistic explanation for spirituality. It suggests that a religious vision might be totally indistinguishable from a toxic response in the gut.
I mean, it really makes you rethink things. Like next time you're having a deep existential crisis or you feel profoundly connected to the cosmos, you have to ask yourself, am I experiencing a genuine spiritual awakening, or do I just desperately need more dietary fiber?
Is my soul just backed up?
Literally, yeah. Is my soul backed up? But honestly, as funny as it is, it perfectly mirrors what modern science is calling the gut-brain axis.
Absolutely.
We now know the gut produces most of our serotonin. So Cabanis, placing the soul in the large intestine, wasn't entirely wrong. He just lacked the vocabulary of microbiomes.
Exactly. It underscores the serious philosophical point the author is making. We cannot separate high-minded concepts of intelligence and soul from the base, vulgar realities of physical matter.
They're completely linked.
If the soul or active intelligence can be dictated by intestinal length and toxins, it proves that intelligence and physical matter are fundamentally intertwined. They are not separate realms.
Which perfectly sets up the next major leap in this framework, diving into Chapter 16. If human intelligence is biologically tied to our guts, it forces us to look at the rest of the natural world differently.
Yes. Flora and fauna.
What about the intelligence of the matter outside of us? What about a tree? What about an insect? The source goes to great lengths to completely dismantle a word we use constantly in science: instinct.
Yes, instinct is arguably one of the laziest, most evasive words in the scientific vocabulary.
Completely lazy.
We use it to explain away complex behaviors in plants and animals that we don't fully understand, primarily because we are arrogant. We are reluctant to grant non-human entities the capacity for genuine reason.
But the argument here is that plants and animals possess rigorous calculating intelligence.
And the ability to make deliberate choices based on spatial and temporal awareness.
The examples are just incredible. Let's look at plants first. There's an observation made by a scientist named Brandis who was studying a plant root.
The boot soul observation.
Yes. As the root grew, it encountered an obstacle buried in the soil: the sole of an old discarded boot. Now, the standard scientific explanation would invoke simple chemical gradients or phototropism, blind mechanical growth.
Right, instinct.
If that were true, the root should have just stopped, or maybe grown wildly around the perimeter of the shoe in a random search pattern.
But the observed behavior was entirely different.
Entirely different. The root encountered the leather boot, and instead of stopping, it somehow sensed the tiny, almost microscopic stitching holes in the leather.
It found the path of least resistance, but actively.
Right. It then deliberately divided itself into multiple tiny rootlets. Each of these individual rootlets threaded itself precisely through a different stitching hole.
Which is amazing on its own.
But it gets better. And then, this is the part I find hardest to explain away as mere chemistry. Once they were all through the leather and out the other side of the sole, they sought each other out and merged back together to form a single homogeneous root to continue growing.
Merged back together.
I mean, couldn't that just be moisture gradients, like the water was coming through the holes?
Even if water was the attractant, the physical execution requires analysis. That is not blind reactive growth. That is computation. The plant analyzed a physical problem, subdivided its resources, navigated a complex obstacle course, and executed a synchronized recombination on the other side. It implies a spatial awareness and a problem-solving capacity that we usually reserve strictly for higher mammals.
And it doesn't stop with roots. There's Maurice Maeterlinck's observation of the intelligence of flowers, specifically the late-blooming salvia.
Yes, the salvia has actually evolved this mechanism that is, well, it is essentially a feat of advanced mechanical and ballistic engineering.
Literal ballistics.
Right. So the flower holds its pollen in these small, sticky sacs. And when a specific type of insect lands to collect nectar, The salvia uses a precise calculation of the insect's weight and leverage.
Wait, it calculates it.
Exactly. The pressure on the flower triggers a mechanism that acts exactly like a catapult. It drops the sac of pollen with absolute rigorous exactitude right onto the back of the insect.
It's a calculated, targeted strike. It's using a fulcrum and a lever.
It is. To dismiss that as mere instinct is to ignore the profound complexity of the design. The plant is exhibiting a form of reasoning. A non-cerebral reasoning, perhaps, but reasoning nonetheless.
And if plants are out here doing geometry, the animals are operating on a whole other level.
Oh, absolutely.
We look at a termite mound and we just see a chaotic, swarming mass of bugs. But the text points out that these insects are constantly, actively calculating their exact population limits.
The math of this swarm.
Yeah, they know the precise minimal and maximal effectives needed for their specific troop size to survive in their environment, and they deliberately regulate their reproduction accordingly. It's population control through advanced calculus.
Or consider the Cyrex wasp. This wasp lays its eggs deep inside the solid wood of trees. But there's another insect, an ichneumon, whose larva can only survive by parasitizing the larva of the Cyrex wasp.
So it needs to find the Cyrex.
Right. So the mother ichneumon lands on the bark of a massive tree. Without being able to see it, hear it, or smell it through inches of solid timber, she uses what the text compares to an internal radar. To locate the exact pinpoint position of the Cyrex larva hidden deep within the wood. She then drills her ovipositor precisely down to lay her egg directly on the unseen host.
You cannot just write that off as a lucky guess.
No, you really can't. The source quotes the writer V.B. Droscher, who makes a very bold, definitive statement. Instinct is the antipode of reason.
The antipode?
Yes. If we define instinct as a blind mechanical reflex, then these animals are absolutely not acting on instinct. Take the example of a desert animal. It is born in captivity, taken to the desert later in life. It has never seen a particular water source. Yet it walks in a perfectly straight line across miles of featureless, shifting sand directly to the water.
How does it know where it is? It has no map.
The argument is that this behavior is driven by spontaneous, diffuse intelligence. But where does this intelligence come from if the animal has never learned it in its lifetime? It brings us right back to the biological alphabet from earlier.
Oh, the chromosomal memory.
Exactly. It is inherited through chromosomal memory. The knowledge of where the water is like a biological GPS. The knowledge of how to calculate the termite population, the knowledge of how to build the pollen catapult. It is all written in the genetic code. It is an active, inherited intelligence, not a blind reflex.
Okay, so we've established that human intelligence might be influenced by the length of our intestines, that plant roots can solve spatial puzzles, and that insects are doing advanced physics.
Right.
But the framework pushes it one step further, because if the universe is vomited from the divine substance, and if everything participates in the divine, then what about the ground we are walking on? What about the stones?
The intelligence of matter itself.
Yes.
This is perhaps the single most challenging concept for the modern rational mind to accept. The idea that a grain of sand, a piece of granite, or a brick possesses a form of active intelligence.
The text makes a really humbling point to introduce this, though. It points out that Albert Einstein, who is, arguably the greatest calculating rational mind of our era, with all of his formulas and deep understanding of macrophysics, would have been completely, utterly incapable of calculating or regulating the behavior of a single living cell of a dog or a single cell of a pine tree.
Because the intelligence operating within that single cell, the microscopic computation happening second by second, is vastly more subtle and complex than the physics that governs stars and planets.
It's just staggering to think about.
There is a hidden intelligence that senses, computes, and reacts with the precision of a supercomputer within every speck of matter.
And to explain how this intelligence exists in what we call dead matter, the text introduces the work of a Russian chemist, V.A. Fursov. And Fursov introduces this concept of the mentino.
Yes, the mentino. In particle physics, we're totally comfortable with electrons, protons, neutrons, neutrinos.
By the building blocks.
Fursov theorizes the existence of another elementary particle called the mentino. He defines it as a literal wave of intelligence. It is a disembodied mind, a fundamental, irreducible building block of consciousness that exists within atomic structures themselves.
Think about what that actually means. If mentinos exist, it means that intelligence isn't just a byproduct of a complex biological brain evolving over millions of years.
No, not at all.
Intelligence is a fundamental property of matter right down to the atomic level. So if I'm understanding Firstoff's concept, it's almost like the physical universe is a giant biological blockchain.
That is an excellent analogy.
Every single atom of granite or wood or steel is a node. And because it possesses Mentinos, it is constantly calculating, interacting, and storing the data of everything happening around it.
The material world isn't just a dead stage where biological life acts out of play. The stage itself is aware. And the text brilliantly connects this atomic level theory to the deep-seated beliefs of our ancient ancestors.
Called the prohibitions.
Yes. It points out that various cultures, specifically the Celts, the Hebrews, and the Arabs, held a profound superstition, a strict prohibition against faceting granite or creating stone statues in human form.
Right. It was considered a massive sacrilege. But why? Because the standard historical explanation is just an arbitrary religious rule against idolatry, worshiping false idols.
Right.
But this framework argues it was much deeper and much more terrifying than that. These ancient peoples believed, or perhaps intuitively understood, the reality of the Mentino. They knew that the stone itself possessed latent life and intelligence.
Therefore, if you took this intelligent matter, this concentrated block of Mentinos, and sculpted it into the form of a human being, you were taking an unimaginable risk.
You were playing God.
You were concentrating that latent intelligence into a functional, recognizable shape. The fear was not symbolic, it was literal. The fear was that the statue might literally come to life, animated by the innate intelligence of the stone, and destroy its creator. The myth of the golem stems directly from this fear.
It completely reframes the biblical and Quranic prohibitions against graven images. It wasn't just about worshiping the wrong god. Yeah. It was a fundamental terror of manipulating the intelligent fabric of reality.
Yes.
Just as tampering with genes is the unpardonable biological sin, manipulating intelligent stone into living forms was seen as a dangerous overstepping of our bounds, a tampering with the intelligence of the mineral kingdom.
It is all connected. The chromosomal writing dictating our identity, the vomited universe making all matter divine, the calculated reasoning of plants, the Mentino vibrating in the stone. The framework outlines a universe that is completely alive, totally aware, and recording everything at every possible level of existence.
Which leaves us with a truly unsettling but profoundly fascinating thought to consider.
Indeed.
If you are sitting in a room right now, look at the walls. If V.A. Firstoff is right, and if the ancients were right to fear the intelligence of stone, if every grain of sand, every brick, and every concrete pillar is constantly vibrating with these disembodied particles of intelligence, these Mentinos, what does that mean for the spaces we inhabit every day? Is the architecture around you right now silently recording, calculating, and remembering your actions through its own mineral chromosomal memory? We will continue our analysis in the next installment.
Which is why the idea that our entire history is a lie isn't just, a conspiracy. I mean, it's the core argument we're unpacking here today.
Right.
Imagine waking up and finding out everything you know about ancient mythology, like the gods, the monsters, the epic miracles.
Yeah.
Finding out it was actually just a heavily degraded historical record of extraterrestrial contact. The premise is basically that human history was put through the worst, longest game of telephone imaginable.
Oh, absolutely. And it's been completely warped by just incredibly poor transmission over the last 5 millennia.
Yeah.
It really demands a total cognitive reset. You have to stop looking at ancient texts as whimsical fairy tales or, allegories.
Right.
And start analyzing them as deeply degraded yet literal historical records. And what's fascinating here is how this loss of true history is framed in the source.
How so?
Well, it's framed as a literal robbery. The word amputated is used deliberately.
Wow. Amputated.
Yeah. The argument is that Christianized nations, and it specifically calls out the French, the Spanish, and the Italians, were virtually amputated from their own ancestors.
So like a deliberate severing.
Exactly. They were robbed of their authentic national mythologies because the true historical record was, deliberately suppressed or entirely overwritten by later religious and political institutions.
That word, amputated, it really sticks with you because it implies a violent, painful removal of a vital part of yourself.
It does.
You don't just misplace an arm, right?
Right.
It's taken from you.
Right.
Okay, let's unpack this with an analogy for you listening right now. Imagine you lose your entire family photo album in a devastating house fire.
Well, that's a good way to look at it.
Right. So you have absolutely no records of who your great-grandparents were, what they look like, where they came from, or what they even did for a living.
Nothing. A total blank slate.
Exactly. So to figure out your own lineage, you have to rely entirely on the vague, half-remembered gossip of a neighbor who maybe met them once 40 years ago.
And we all know how reliable that is.
Right. And over the years, that neighbor's stories get more and more exaggerated. Oh, your grandfather was 10 feet tall. He could lift a horse.
Yeah, the myth-making begins.
That is essentially what happened to the cultural memory of these nations. They lost the album, and they were forced to accept a completely different narrative that was just imposed upon them, leaving them utterly disconnected from their actual ancient roots.
And that disconnection creates an immense psychological vacuum. And human nature inevitably tries to fill that vacuum.
Right. We need stories.
Exactly. And if we connect this to the bigger picture, there is a brilliant historical anchor to explain how this exact mechanism works. A guy named Ephemeris.
Ephemeris, okay.
Yeah, he was a Greek philosopher from the 4th century BC.
That's ancient.
Very. And he proposed a theory that was incredibly controversial back then, but honestly, it makes perfect rational sense today.
What did he say?
Ephemeris claimed that the gods of mythology, like Zeus, Hera, all of them, they were never divine supernatural beings to begin with. They were simply human beings.
Wait, hold on. Just human beings.
Just humans.
But how do you go from a regular person walking around ancient Greece to an immortal god living on Mount Olympus throwing lightning bolts? I mean, that's a massive leap.
It is a massive leap, but it's a leap driven by the passage of time and the human propensity for awe.
Okay.
Ephemeris argued that these were human beings who were so extraordinary or so powerful or maybe so technologically advanced that they were deified by the generations that followed them.
So they were basically just really impressive people.
Right. They were beings prone to being admired. And over time, admiration mutates into reverence.
Yep.
Then reverence mutates into veneration. And finally, veneration solidifies into actual worship.
So Ephemeris essentially looked at Mount Olympus and said, these aren't gods. They're just really famous, powerful people whose legends got wildly out of hand over a few hundred years.
That is exactly what he said.
And the parallel to our modern pop culture and politics is, well, it's almost uncomfortable. The argument here is that we are doing the exact same thing right now.
We absolutely are.
We haven't stopped deifying people. We've just updated the terminology. Like, look at Hollywood.
Oh, perfect example.
We literally called the actress Greta Garbo the divine. That wasn't just a cute nickname.
No, it wasn't.
It was a literal elevation of her status above mere mortality.
Exactly. The human impulse to elevate our peers to godhood hasn't faded one bit. We see this Ephemerean theory as a continuous historical process. Look at the actor Rudolph Valentino.
Oh, yeah. The hysteria around him was wild.
Right. When he died in 1927, the public reaction wasn't just standard grief. It became a full-blown cult of personality.
Women were fainting in the streets, right?
Fainting, there were riots, there were even reported suicides. It reached a level of mass hysteria and veneration that perfectly mirrored ancient religious fervor.
And it gets even stranger when you cross cultural lines. There's this bizarre historical footnote from the text from 1950.
Right, the Bassian case.
Yeah. In the Dayami temples in West Africa, divine honors were actively being paid to a French woman named Lydia Bastian.
It's incredible.
She's just a regular woman, a hero of the post-war Paris underground. But she travels to a completely different cultural context, and suddenly she's being treated as a literal deity in a temple.
Which perfectly illustrates how geographic and cultural distance acts exactly like the passage of time.
It distorts things.
Yes, distance distorts a human being into a mythological figure. And the same thing happens with political and sporting figures.
Yeah.
Take General de Gaulle in France after his death in 1970.
Oh, sure. He became larger than life.
He was rapidly elevated from a flawed political leader to an almost mythic, infallible savior figure in the national consciousness. Or even athletes. Look at the Italian cyclist Fausto Coppi.
A cyclist?
Yeah. To his fans, he wasn't just an athlete who pedaled a bike fast. He was a transcendent, almost superhuman figure.
Okay, so I want you listening to this to just imagine this for a second. Think about our current celebrity worship. Right. Think about the way people treat pop stars or tech billionaires or politicians today.
It's intense.
If our civilization were wiped out tomorrow by some cataclysm and someone found fragments of our internet 5,000 years in the future, how would that look?
They think we worship them.
Exactly. If they found the way we talk about Taylor Swift or Elon Musk or huge sports icons, but they didn't have the context that these are just flesh and blood humans who go to the grocery store and get sick.
What would they think?
Right. Are we actively creating a new pantheon of gods right now? In 5 millennia, will some future historian be trying to decipher the mythology of the divine figures who ruled the mystical lands of Silicon Valley or the Hollywood Hills?
It's a great point, and it raises an important question. If the gods of the past were just humans, or physical beings who interacted with humans, what was it about them that made them so memorable?
Why did their stories stick?
Exactly. What made their specific game of telephone last for thousands of years while other stories just faded away?
Well, according to this perspective, all of these ancient, distorted narratives converge on one dominant celestial body.
The planet Venus.
Yes. And this is where the classical mythology we all learned gets aggressively upended. We are taught in school from day one that Apollo is the sun god.
Right, the golden chariot.
You picture him in this glowing chariot, literally dragging the sun across the daytime sky. But the argument here is that this is a massive, fundamental mistranslation of history. Apollo wasn't a sun god at all.
No, he wasn't.
Apollo was a representation of Venus.
Which sounds completely counterintuitive until you look at the underlying traits. The assertion in the text is that once you make that paradigm shift, once you view Apollo as Venusian rather than solar, all of Western mythology suddenly snaps into logical focus.
It just clicks.
It really does. The persistent contradictions in the ancient texts disappear. Because the attributes of these ancient initiators, the beings who supposedly kick-started human civilization, they are remarkably consistent across completely disconnected cultures.
Provided you tie them to Venus.
Exactly, provided you tie them to Venus.
Let's talk about those attributes, because they are very, very specific. These Venusian initiators are always described as possessing subhuman beauty.
Oh, which is such a strange phrase.
Right. No, that's really strange. When I hear subhuman, I usually think of something lesser.
Like animalistic.
Exactly. But in this context, it seems to mean a beauty that is almost terrifying. A beauty that exists completely outside the normal human spectrum.
Uncanny.
Yes, uncanny, irresistible, but deeply alien. And this eerie, perfect beauty applies to multiple figures. Bel, Baal, and this is the one that really made me pause.
Lucifer.
Lucifer.
Wait, the inclusion of Lucifer is the linchpin here. In modern theology, Lucifer is synonymous with ultimate evil.
Pitchforks, horns, hellfire.
Exactly. But we have to look at the etymology. In the original Latin, Lucifer literally translates to light bringer, or the morning star.
And astronomically speaking.
The morning star is, and always has been, the planet Venus. So there is a direct, undeniable line being drawn between the mythological archetype of a supremely beautiful, light-bringing entity and the physical planet Venus.
So they weren't demons.
Not in the modern sense, no.
Yeah.
They were initiators. They brought light, meaning knowledge, culture, mathematics, and civilization, which is precisely why they were venerated before history was rewritten.
And this Venusian thread doesn't start in the Mediterranean. It weaves right into Celtic mythology.
Oh, the Celtic connection is fascinating.
Right, we have the Celtic god Lugh. Lugh is always described as this radiant, prodigious child, the great initiator who built the first cities.
Right.
But what's really mind-blowing is his parentage. Lugh is the son of a goddess named Arianrod, and Arianrod literally translates to silver wheel.
And this is where the mythological archetypes start colliding with potentially technological realities. Think about the phrase, a silver wheel in the sky.
Yeah.
If you are an ancient pre-industrial person trying to describe a metallic, highly reflective, disc-shaped craft hovering above you,
Silver wheel is exactly the vocabulary you would invent.
it's the only frame of reference you have. And this cultic silver wheel directly parallels the biblical visions in the book of Ezekiel.
Oh, the wheels within wheel.
Yes. Ezekiel famously describes seeing terrifying, majestic wheels descending from the sky, accompanied by living beings. The argument is that Arianrod, Ezekiel's wheels, and the Venusian initiators are all desperate linguistic attempts to describe the exact same physical phenomena.
Advanced extraterrestrial craft.
Precisely.
Here's where it gets really interesting, because if we take this lens, the idea of advanced craft and physical radiant beings, and apply it to the book of Exodus,
Everything changes.
the entire story completely changes. We all know the story of Moses on Mount Sinai receiving the Ten Commandments. But if you reread those passages as if you're reading a modern UFO encounter report, the hairs on your arms will literally stand up.
Because the physical parallels are just staggering.
Yeah.
The biblical account states that God spoke to Moses from a thick cloud that settled over the mountain.
But this wasn't a rain cloud.
No. It was accompanied by the deafening sound of thunder, intense flashes of lightning, and the blaring of a trumpet so loud that the entire camp of Israelites trembled in terror at the base of the mountain.
So loud it terrified thousands of people.
Exactly. So if we strip away the theological interpretation we've been handed
Mm,
and just look at the raw physical data being reported, what do we have?
right.
A massive obscured object descends, emitting blinding light, deafening acoustic noise, and extreme atmospheric disturbance.
It's the exact description of a rocket landing or a massive, heavy propulsion craft hovering. The trumpet is literally the screech of an engine.
Yes.
And then look at the aftermath. Moses comes down from the mountain after supposedly speaking face-to-face with the Lord, and what happens to his body?
The glowing face.
His skin is glowing, it's brilliantly radiant, it's so blindingly bright that he has to wear a physical veil because his own people are terrified to look at him.
Exactly. The event is recontextualized not as a spiritual miracle, but as a close encounter of the third kind, resulting in physical trauma.
Like radiation burns.
Exactly. Moses was exposed to intense radiation, or perhaps the extreme luminosity of an extraterrestrial craft and its occupants. The Lord, in this context, isn't an omnipresent spiritual creator, but an advanced extraterrestrial initiator.
Wow.
And given the consistent radiant descriptions, likely of the same Venusian origin as Lug and Apollo.
And what's wild is how these Venusian encounters are constantly linked to specific environments, particularly water.
Which makes perfect astronomical sense. Venus is often the last star shining brightly over the horizon. Just before dawn, its brilliant light reflects across the surface of the ocean or large lakes.
Right.
This visual reality, the brightest light in the sky, intimately connected with the surface of the water, birthed an entire subset of mythology.
Which perfectly explains Fairy Morgana.
Yes, Morgan Le Fay.
She's a huge figure in Arthurian legend. Her name is rooted in words meaning the brightest or born of the sea. In the legends, she is described as flying over the water in a small boat pulled by marine animals, and her palace is located at the bottom of the waters. She is explicitly linked to Venus, the Luciferous star, the light bringer shining over the morning waves.
It's a beautiful, poetic image.
It is. But what if it's not just poetry? What if it's a distorted memory of an actual amphibious vehicle skimming over the water, piloted by one of these radiant initiators before submerging into a subaquatic base?
And this aquatic Venusian theme is the perfect bridge into what is arguably the deepest, most foundational myth in French history.
Yes.
It brings all these elements, water, beauty, and aerial craft, together into one story.
The legend of Melusina. Okay, if you're not familiar with French folklore, Melusina is a massive deal. She's the quintessential water fairy, the mother of dynasties.
Very important figure.
Let's break down the classic medieval legend, specifically the version penned by writers like Jehan Dara in the 14th century. So the story goes like this. A nobleman named Remonden is wandering in the woods of Poitou at night.
Classic setup.
Right. He comes across a fountain, and by this water, he meets a woman of absolutely extraordinary subhuman beauty. Her name is Melusina. They immediately fall in love, they marry, but she makes him swear one unbreakable oath.
There's always a catch.
Always, he must never, ever look at her on a Saturday.
Which is a classic folklore trope, the broken taboo. It's the mechanism designed to trigger the tragic climax of the story.
Exactly. So they have a long, prosperous marriage. She brings him immense wealth. She has unparalleled architectural knowledge. And together they built the great impregnable city of Lusignan. But there's a massive biological problem. They have children, and the children are, well, monstrous.
Mutated.
Horribly mutated. One has a giant eye in the middle of his forehead. Another has a massive lion's paw right on his cheek.
Yeah.
Eventually, Remondin's curiosity gets the better of him.
He breaks the taboo.
He spies on her on a Saturday while she's bathing in her specialized tub. And he discovers her terrifying secret. From the waist down, she isn't human. She is a massive, scaly serpent.
And the climax of the story is equally bizarre.
Right. So he eventually confronts her in front of his court. In her grief and rage at being discovered, she leaps from the high window of their castle.
But she doesn't fall.
She doesn't fall to her death. She transforms midair into a giant winged serpent, lets out a terrible ear-splitting cry, and flies away into the sky, only returning occasionally as a phantom to wail over the castle when one of her descendants is about to die.
It is a sweeping, tragic medieval romance. But we need to do what we did with Apollo and Moses.
Strip it down.
Exactly. We need to strip away the fairy tale gloss.
Yeah.
Strip away the medieval romanticism added by 14th century writers who were just trying to write a good story for their patrons.
Right.
When you look at the raw data of the narrative, what do you actually have? A beautiful entity from nowhere who possesses incredibly advanced knowledge, who gives birth to non-human genetically anomalous hybrids, and who eventually turns into a flying snake to escape.
But wait, let's be real here. A beautiful woman doesn't biologically transform into an aerodynamic flying reptile.
Obviously not.
That breaks every law of physics, biology, and common sense. So what exactly is this winged serpent?
The winged serpent is a universal mythological trope for a flying spacecraft.
Wow.
Think about it. If you are an ancient observer trying to describe a sleek, elongated metallic machine that flies through the air without flapping wings like a bird, what do you call
A
it?
snake.
Right. You like the word fuselage. You like the word rocket. The closest visual analog in nature is a snake. Add wings to symbolize flight, and you have a winged serpent.
That makes so much sense.
And crucially, this isn't just a localized French phenomenon. Melusina is part of a staggering global pattern.
This is where you have to zoom out and look at the whole map. Look at Quetzalcoatl, the feathered serpent of the Mayans.
Right.
He was a deity who explicitly descended from the sky to bring mathematics, agriculture, and knowledge to humanity. Look at the solar bark of Karnak in ancient Egypt, which the texts describe literally as a serpent flying rapidly from one horizon to the other. Look at the Naga of India, the fabulous flying dragons that guard secret subterranean knowledge.
Exactly.
These are completely disparate, unconnected cultures. It defies logic to say they all independently hallucinated the exact same aerodynamic flying reptile. It points to a globally witnessed phenomenon of aerial vehicles, interpreted through the lens of whatever local wildlife made the most sense.
And to solidify this extraterrestrial Venusian connection, we have to look at South America.
Okay.
There is a figure in Peruvian tradition named Orjona. According to the myth, Orjona arrived at Lake Titicaca in a brilliant golden spaceship.
Literal spaceship.
Yes, and the legends explicitly state she came from the planet Venus, and her mission was to mother a new line of humanity.
Wow. Which perfectly aligns with the genetic hybridization we see in the Melusina myth with her mutated children.
Exactly. The argument is that Melusina isn't just a fairy tale. She is the French equivalent of Orjona. She was an extraterrestrial initiator, a biological entity that arrived in a craft, the winged serpent, at a specific geographic location, the fountain in Poitou, to impart knowledge and perhaps mingle genetics.
And once you accept that premise, the secret initiatory symbolism built into the Melusina myth becomes incredibly obvious. It's like a code hiding in plain sight.
Completely.
The cave, or the fountain where they meet, represents the center of initiation, the specific point of terrestrial contact. The serpent represents the craft itself, or the advanced initiate within it.
Right.
The treasure, which Melusina is said to fiercely guard, isn't a literal pile of gold coins. It represents the advanced technological and spiritual knowledge she brought. And then there's the location, the city of Lusignan. They were the capital of the Celts in that specific region.
And remember the Celtic connection.
Yes. Do you remember who we talked about earlier? Lug, the radiant Celtic god. Lusignan is literally Lug's city. The old spelling of the city is Lucinem, which is practically an anagram for Melusina.
What's fascinating here is how all these seemingly disparate, random pieces of human history,
Yeah.
a French fairy tale, a Peruvian creation myth, Celtic etymology, and ancient Egyptian iconography,
Right.
they're all synthesized into a single, cohesive, terrifyingly logical theory of ancient global extraterrestrial intervention.
But this raises a massive, crucial question.
What's that?
If these beings were just advanced teachers or extraterrestrial scientists or even just beautiful Venusian humanoids bringing the treasure of knowledge to help humanity,
Right.
how did they become the villains? How do we get from a radiant initiator like Melusina or the Lightbringer Lucifer to the concept of hideous, evil, flesh-eating demons?
It all comes down to the demonization of the unknown.
Okay.
There's a sociological principle that when a highly advanced civilization interacts with a primitive one, the advanced technology is entirely indistinguishable from magic.
Right, Clarke's third law.
Exactly. Over centuries, as the direct physical contact with these initiators fades, the true nature of these beings is lost. Remember the amputated history we started with?
The lost photo album.
Yes. The narrative vacuum is then taken over by new power structures, particularly the medieval church. Anything that is powerful, incomprehensible, and outside the strict bounds of orthodox religious control is automatically relabeled as demonic.
It's just easier to call it evil.
Precisely. This transitions us directly into the dark, bloody era of witchcraft and the historical misunderstanding of physical anomalies.
There is this bizarre, incredibly specific historical account in the text that perfectly illustrates this demonization. It's the story of a man named Father Lupa.
Oh, this one is wild.
It really is. This happened during a Mass of the Holy Sacrament on August 9th. Father Lupo is somehow afflicted, and during the Mass, an entity that is supposedly inside him or associated with him is aggressively addressed by the congregation and the exorcist as Beelzebub.
Right. On the surface, it is presented as a classic, terrifying case of demonic possession. But we have to look past the religious panic and focus on the physicality of the event.
Yes.
The historical account details a specific moment where the exorcists demand to know if some sort of spell is preventing this entity from leaving Father Lupa's body.
And the entity's response is wild. It completely bucks the Hollywood exorcism tropes.
No head spinning here.
No. It doesn't speak in ancient Sumerian. It doesn't quote scripture backwards. The account explicitly states its only response was to roar.
To roar.
It literally mooed or bellowed like a massive animal or a machine, and then it launched itself into the air.
Vertically.
Yes. And it did so with such incredible, violent, mechanical force that the multiple men physically holding it down couldn't stop it from taking off vertically.
Now, if we apply logic to this, we have to ask a hard question. Are we reading a literal, factual account of a minion of hell defying gravity?
Probably not.
Or are we reading about medieval humanity completely conflating advanced technology or perhaps a severe physical anomaly with demonic possession?
Right. They just didn't have the words for it.
The people of that era completely lacked the vocabulary for anti-gravity propulsion, flight suits, or even severe, misunderstood psychological illnesses that grant bursts of adrenaline-fueled strength.
So a machine taking off.
A craft, or an entity using a propulsion device, roaring like an engine and launching into the air against physical restraint, simply becomes a demon breaking free.
That is so wild.
The demons and prodigies of the Middle Ages are just the distorted, terrifying, misunderstood shadows of the gods and initiators of the ancient world.
And because these entities became associated with ultimate biblical evil, the mythology around them grew darker and more apocalyptic.
Very dark.
There is a dark prophecy tied to these misunderstood demons, specifically to the ancient deity Moloch.
Moloch, right?
Moloch was a terrifying god associated with fire and child sacrifice in the ancient Near East. But this ancient memory was tied to a much larger, more modern dread. A widespread prophecy of a great universal genocide promised to Moloch in the year 2000.
It's a fascinating reflection of deep-seated apocalyptic anxiety.
Yeah.
It shows how the ancient, fragmented memory of powerful, highly advanced, and sometimes destructive beings morphed into a persistent underlying cultural fear. A fear that these beings would eventually return, not to initiate us or build cities, but to annihilate us for our ignorance.
It's like a cosmic reckoning.
Exactly. The year 2000 served as a convenient to round number focal point for this eschatological dread, representing the ultimate terrifying consequence of our fractured relationship with our supposed cosmic ancestors.
Okay, so we've covered ancient myths being misinterpreted history. We've covered medieval demons being misunderstood technology. We're tracking this massive millennia-long distortion.
We are.
But if you're listening to this right now, you're probably thinking the exact same thing I am.
Where's the proof?
Exactly. Okay, fine. Let's say they were real. Let's say they actually flew around in silver wheels and winged serpents thousands of years ago. Where is the physical proof today?
It's the right question to ask.
We have thousands of satellites orbiting the Earth. We have sophisticated military radar. We have deep Earth archaeology. Where are the receipts?
It's the most important question. And the evidence begins by looking at physical records carved into stone that cannot be easily erased or amputated.
Okay, lay on me.
Take the discovery made by the Mexican archaeologist Carlos Villanueva.
Right.
He was exploring an extremely remote area known as the Valley of Marvels in San Pedro de las Colonias, Mexico. What he found there was not just a few isolated scratches in a cave.
It was massive.
He found 3 continuous kilometers of highly detailed rock carvings.
3 kilometers, that's not a doodle. That is a massive, deliberate, exhaustive historical record. And what exactly is on these rocks? The descriptions of the carvings are incredibly specific.
Very specific.
They feature humanoid beings, but they have perfectly spherical heads. There are no noses, no eyes, no mouths visible whatsoever.
Not at all.
Just smooth, unbroken spherical domes. And they are depicted in bizarre postures where they appear to be floating with their hands and feet upturned, essentially floating in zero gravity.
Floating, exactly.
The text's analysis doesn't mince words here. It explicitly calls them out as cosmonauts wearing enclosed spacesuits.
It's a highly compelling visual argument.
Yeah.
Think about human art. Even the most primitive ancient artist, when trying to carve a human face, will carve indentations for eyes and a slit for a mouth.
It's instinct.
It is the most basic human instinct to recognize a face. If an artist deliberately carves a blank, featureless sphere instead of a face, it is highly probable they are documenting exactly what they saw, a completely enclosed, opaque helmet. Villanueva's discovery bridges the gap between airy mythology and hard physical reality.
Yeah.
The ancients weren't just making up fairy tales around a campfire, they were painstakingly carving the technological reality they actually witnessed into the bedrock of the planet so it wouldn't be forgotten.
But the proof doesn't stop at ancient carvings in Mexico. We have to bring this phenomenon right up into the modern era,
We do.
specifically looking at how our own advanced technology is interacting with these supposed craft right now. The military and maritime records of modern UFO encounters involving what are called radar ghosts are chilling.
Because radar is purely objective.
Right.
Radar doesn't have a cultural bias, it doesn't get hysterical, and it doesn't invent fairy tales, it just pings mass.
It just tells you if something is there.
Exactly. Consider the incident from October 1970 off the coast of the Canary Islands. A transatlantic ship's radar picked up a massive object directly in their path.
Huge object.
The ship approached the object, getting to within a single mile of it. The radar instruments were absolutely screaming that there was a massive physical obstruction right in front of the bow.
But when the crew rushed to the deck and looked out at the ocean, absolutely nothing.
Nothing.
Just empty, calm water. And then the radar echo didn't just speed off the screen, it slowly, gradually vanished into thin air right in front of them.
Like it just faded out of reality.
Yeah. And there was a very similar incident that occurred a year earlier in 1969 in the Mediterranean. A military ship tracking an enormous, solid object on radar that was visually completely invisible to the naked eye.
What's fascinating here is the absolute assertion regarding these events in the source material. Radars don't lie.
That's a strong statement.
It implies a terrifying reality about our current technological state. Our technology is just now becoming advanced enough to detect the physical mass of these craft, even when they utilize some form of advanced cloaking, or exist in a frequency or state of matter that renders them invisible to our limited biological eyesight.
Let me use an analogy here to make this clear. It's like you are standing on the edge of a completely flat, muddy field.
Okay.
You look out, and you can't see a single thing in the field. But suddenly, you watch a massive, deep footprint being slowly pressed into the mud by a completely invisible foot.
Oh, that's creepy.
Right. The machine, the mud in this case, or the radar, registers the absolute truth of a heavy physical mass pressing down into reality, even if your biological eyes cannot perceive the entity making the print. The radar is the mud, catching the invisible, undeniable footprint of the modern winged serpent.
That's exactly it. And if we logically accept that these advanced craft are currently operating in our atmosphere right now, it naturally leads to the question of how they do it.
The propulsion.
What are their propulsion systems? Do they hover silently? This leads us to the incredibly mysterious, suppressed case of an inventor named Vandenberg.
Ah, Vandenberg. The Vandenberg mystery reads exactly like a mid-century paranoid spy thriller.
It really does.
Vandenberg was an inventor who supposedly cracked the code. He invented a functioning, completely fuelless motor, a device that essentially produced clean, free energy, potentially tapping into the exact same electromagnetic or anti-gravitic principles that power these aerial phenomena.
Right.
But the moment his invention started to become known, the moment he was organizing demonstrations to prove it to the scientific world, he completely vanished without a single trace.
And his disappearance marks two prevailing theories in the text, both of which are deeply unsettling.
What's the first one?
The first theory, leaning fully into the extraterrestrial thesis we've been discussing, is that he was abducted by the aliens themselves.
Oh, really?
Yeah. Perhaps humanity simply wasn't ready for that level of technological leap. Or perhaps, by turning on his machine, he tapped into a frequency or a power source that alerted them, and it attracted their direct, immediate intervention to confiscate the technology.
That's wild. But the second theory is much more grounded in human greed, though it's equally terrifying.
The corporate angle.
Right. Was he kidnapped or simply assassinated by a powerful shadow corporate industrial group?
Yeah, makes sense.
A syndicate whose entire global empire was built on the monopoly of fossil fuels. They would be fundamentally existentially threatened by the sudden release of completely free energy.
Both theories ultimately involve the violent suppression of world-changing knowledge. But what grounds the Vandenberg story and keeps it from just being a conspiracy theory is the claim that physical photographs of the motor's intricate components still exist.
So there's actual evidence.
It wasn't just a conceptual sketch on a napkin. It was tangible physical hardware that prompted a very real, very drastic, and ultimately fatal response.
So let's look at the board so far. We have ancient myths that are actually degraded histories of Venusian contact.
Yeah.
We have medieval demons that are actually terrifyingly misunderstood advanced technology. We have ancient Mexican cosmonauts carved in stone, radar ghosts haunting our oceans, and suppressed free energy tech getting inventors disappeared.
We've covered a lot.
This brings us to the ultimate synthesis, the peak of the mountain here. If they were here in the past, initiating our ancestors, and our radars are tracking their invisible craft right now,
Yes.
are they actively walking among us today? Are they talking to anyone?
To answer that, we have to dive into the deep end of 20th century contactee lore.
Let's do it.
We aren't just talking about people seeing lights in the sky. We are talking about organizations and individuals who claim to be in active, ongoing diplomatic communication with these beings.
Okay.
Specifically, we have to look at the Etheria Society and a highly controversial, fascinating figure known as Eamon Y.
Eamon Y. And Eamon Y is presented not as a crazy person in the woods, but as the supposed official representative of a planet called Bavaren.
Yes, Bavi.
And Bavi is reportedly located in the Proxima Centauri star system.
Yeah.
This isn't just a vague, I feel at one with the cosmos type of connection. This is a claim of literal diplomatic representation from an inhabited exoplanet.
And the physical biology of these extraterrestrials, specifically the Venusians, gets incredibly granular.
The details are crazy.
It reads almost like a classified biological profile or an autopsy report. It claims that these Venusians are precisely 2.30 meters tall.
That's roughly 7.5 feet tall.
They possess cinnamon-colored skin, long hair, and vivid blue eyes. They are consistently described as wearing completely seamless one-piece suits, which mirrors modern descriptions of advanced flight gear.
But the internal biology is where my brain completely short-circuits.
The temperature.
Yes. The claim is that their internal body temperature runs between 110 to 150 degrees Fahrenheit. Now think about that.
It's lethal for us.
For a normal human, a fever of 105 degrees is a critical medical emergency. 108 degrees is fatal. These beings supposedly operate at a baseline resting temperature that would literally boil human blood and denature our proteins. How is that even biologically possible?
It implies a completely different evolutionary path, likely adapted to the extreme, hostile environment of a planet like Venus where surface temperatures are high enough to melt lead. A biology based on different proteins or solvents could theoretically operate at those temperatures. But the most crucial biological difference isn't their temperature. It's how they communicate.
Telepathy.
They reportedly communicate purely by telepathy. No vocal cords, no spoken language, no misunderstandings, just direct, instantaneous mind-to-mind transmission of concepts and data.
Which completely explains the past. If we connect this telepathy back to the ancient encounters, it explains why the initiations were so successful and why figures like Melusina or Lug were seen as possessing godlike wisdom.
It's a perfect teaching method.
Direct neural transfer of knowledge is infinitely more efficient than trying to explain mathematics using a primitive spoken language. You don't have to teach them the words, you just project the understanding directly into their brain.
Exactly. And from individuals like M and Y, we move to mass contact events. There is the deeply cinematic story of a man named Eugenio Siragusa. Siragusa's claim is profound. He detailed a physical meeting with 3 massive, radiant envoys of what he called the Intergalactic Confederation.
And the location of this meeting is just
It's perfectly chosen for entities with extreme body heat.
inside the active crater of the Mount Etna volcano in Sicily.
Yes.
Yeah.
It's an isolated, highly dramatic, thermally extreme location, perfect for an extraterrestrial rendezvous away from prying human eyes.
But as wild as a meeting in a volcano is, it's the astronomical claims associated with these extraterrestrial secret societies that are Truly staggering.
This is the big one.
Now, if you're listening to this and thinking, okay, flying serpents are one thing, but this next claim is going to sound completely unhinged.
Bear with us.
I had the exact same reaction. Prepare yourself for the concept of the black moon.
The Black Moon. It's described not as a natural rock, but as an artificial satellite of immense proportions.
Wow.
According to these contactee reports, this massive object was purposefully placed into a specific hidden orbit by extraterrestrials for two distinct reasons.
Okay, what are they?
First, to serve as a clandestine meeting base, a secure way station for these secret societies to monitor Earth.
Like an observation deck.
Exactly. And second, and far more dramatically, to act as a massive gravitational counterbalance to prevent our natural moon from destabilizing and colliding with the Earth.
Let's just pause on that because the implications are terrifying.
They really are.
The suggestion is that our entire solar system has been artificially engineered to preserve human life. That without this hidden, massive black moon regulating the orbital mechanics in the background, we would have been destroyed millennia ago.
It completely humbles the human ego.
That is a level of intervention that makes the ancient gods throwing lightning bolts look like minor middle managers.
It positions humanity not as the undisputed masters of our own destiny, but as a protected, perhaps even cultivated species living inside a much larger, incredibly ancient, highly managed galactic ecosystem.
A terrarium.
Right. And this humbling realization brings us to a final, incredibly poignant philosophical dilemma regarding the Pioneer 10 space probe.
Pioneer 10, March 1972. Humanity is feeling incredibly proud of itself.
Oh, we were very proud.
We launched Pioneer 10. It's the very first spacecraft destined to eventually leave our solar system and enter deep space. And attached to the side of it is this now famous 15 by 22 centimeter gold anodized aluminum plaque.
The message in a bottle.
We all know the image. A simple line drawing of a naked human man and woman, a little diagram of our solar system showing where we live, and some basic binary code about the spin transition of hydrogen.
Right.
We essentially threw a message in a bottle into the infinite cosmic ocean, desperately trying to tell the universe, hello, we exist, we are smart, and this is what we look like.
But there is a devastatingly logical, almost tragic flaw in that plan.
What is it?
We send out this physical plaque, implicitly assuming that whoever finds it perceives the universe exactly the same way we do. We assume they have optical organs that see our specific narrow spectrum of visible light. We assume they understand the abstract concept of two-dimensional line drawings representing three-dimensional objects.
Right.
We assume they even comprehend our physical dimension. But if we accept everything we've just discussed, if the universe is actually populated by telepathic beings with boiling blood, or entities that can shift their mass to exist as invisible radar ghosts, or beings of an entirely unknown nature, form, and dimensional consistency.
Can they even comprehend our physical reality? Are we essentially trying to explain the color blue to a species that only experiences the universe through raw mathematics, gravity waves, and telepathy?
A huge disconnect.
It asks whether our incredibly proud, monumental scientific achievement, this little aluminum plaque, is just completely undecipherable gibberish to the very beings we are trying so hard to contact.
It's a really tragic kind of human arrogance.
We think we are shouting into an empty void waiting for an answer.
When the reality might be that we are shouting our crude physical geometry into a void, completely failing to recognize the presence of highly advanced entities that have been quietly interacting with our planet, flying through our oceans, and managing our history for thousands of years, operating on principles we cannot even begin to fathom.
So what does this all mean? I want you to really think about this tonight.
Yeah, let this sink in.
If human history isn't what we thought, but just a series of misremembered, traumatic encounters with the cosmos, if our sacred mythologies are just cargo cult memories of Venusian spaceships...
The lost photo album.
Exactly. And if we are currently hurling little aluminum plaques into deep space, desperately trying to contact beings who might have been living right here, hiding in our deep oceans and our active volcanoes for thousands of years.
What happens next?
What happens when our technology finally catches up to the magic they used to initiate us? When we crack zero-point free energy, when we master telepathic neural interfaces, when we build our own silver wheels that can bend gravity?
Are we about to become the very gods our primitive ancestors wrote about?
Are we finally, after 5,000 years, stepping off the ancient dusty pages of mythology and stepping into the terrifying reality they left behind for us?
It suggests the ultimate beautiful cyclical journey of human evolution.
Yeah.
We are simply growing up to meet our initiators.
We really are. Thank you so much for hanging out in the conversation today. If you enjoyed this deep dive, please remember to like, subscribe, and leave a comment down below with your thoughts, especially if you have theories on the black moon. Smash that subscribe button so you never miss a moment as we continue to explore the most fascinating reality-bending texts out there. We'll see you next time.